Hey everyone, welcome back. Grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's build something peaceful in Minecraft while I walk you through 15 stories that are anything but peaceful. Today we're diving into lies, betrayals, and the kind of revenge that makes you wonder if karma keeps a spreadsheet. Before we jump in, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's been tuning in, leaving comments, and supporting the channel. Seriously, thank you. Every like, comment, and share makes a bigger impact than you know, and I appreciate it more than words can say. Let's go back to the beginning, when everything looked perfect and the storyteller had no clue they were living in a well-crafted illusion. They met someone who seemed almost unreal, caring, romantic, always there. Looking back, that alone should have been the first red flag. I met Alex at a coffee shop on a random Tuesday morning. He was charming in that effortless way that immediately puts you at ease, like he'd known you for years even though you just made eye contact over the espresso machine. We started talking about nothing important, just the usual small talk about work and the weather, but somehow it felt different. He asked for my number before I left, and I gave it to him without hesitation. Looking back, I should have noticed how quickly he moved, how eager he seemed to fill every gap in his schedule with me. But I didn't. I was too caught up in the rush of meeting someone who actually seemed interested. He told me he'd just gotten out of a messy breakup about 3 months prior. He didn't go into details, just said it had been toxic and draining, and he was finally ready to move on. I didn't press him on it. Everyone has a past, right? And he seemed so present, so focused on me, that I figured whatever happened before was genuinely behind him. We started seeing each other regularly, and within a few weeks it felt like we'd been together forever. He was attentive in ways I didn't even know I needed. He remembered the small things, like how I took my coffee, or that I hated making phone calls. He'd text me good morning every single day and call me on his lunch breaks just to hear my voice. It felt like the kind of relationship people write songs about. 6 months in, he asked me to move in with him. I was hesitant at first because 6 months felt fast, but he made this whole speech about how life's too short to waste time when you know something's right. He said he'd never felt this way about anyone before, that I made him feel like he could finally breathe again after everything he'd been through. So I said yes. I packed up my tiny studio apartment and moved into his place, a decent two-bedroom on the east side of town. It felt like a fairy tale, like I'd finally found the person I was supposed to be with. That lasted about 2 weeks. I was unpacking the last of my boxes when I decided to reorganize his closet to make room for my clothes. He was at work and I figured I'd surprise him by getting everything sorted before he got home. I pulled out a cardboard box from the top shelf, expecting to find old shoes or maybe some winter gear. Instead, I found a collection of memories that didn't include me. Love letters written in looping handwriting, signed with a name I recognized, Emma. Photos of Alex with a blonde woman, her arms wrapped around him, both of them grinning at the camera like they didn't have a care in the world. Concert tickets, movie stubs, receipts from restaurants I'd never been to. My stomach dropped as I started checking the dates. They weren't from before we met. They were from after. Some of them were from 2 months ago. Some were from last week. I sat on the floor of that closet for what felt like hours, just staring at the evidence in my hands. My brain was trying to make sense of it, trying to find some logical explanation that didn't end with me being a complete idiot. Maybe these were old and he just forgot to throw them away. Maybe the dates were wrong. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I just didn't want to accept it. When Alex got home that night, I had everything laid out on the bed. The letters, the photos, the tickets, all of it. He walked into the bedroom and froze. For a split second, I saw panic flash across his face before he tried to play it off with confusion. He asked what I was doing going through his stuff, tried to turn it around on me like I was the one in the wrong. I didn't let him. I picked up one of the photos, the one dated 3 weeks ago, and asked him to explain. He opened his mouth, closed it, then sat down on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. That's when he told me everything. He and Emma had never actually broken up. They'd been on a break when we met. One of those toxic on-again, off-again situations where neither person can fully commit, but neither person can fully let go either. He said they'd been fighting a lot and she told him she needed space to figure out what she wanted. So he gave her space. And apparently he decided the best way to handle that space was to start dating me. He said he didn't plan for it to happen, that he genuinely liked me and thought maybe we could be something real. But the whole time, he was still in contact with Emma, still seeing her occasionally, still trying to figure out if they could make it work. I asked him why he didn't just tell me, why he let me move in, why he let me believe we had a future together when I was nothing more than a placeholder. He didn't have a good answer for that. He just kept saying he was confused, that he didn't know what he wanted, that he thought maybe if he spent enough time with me, he'd get over Emma. But he didn't. And now she was ready to try again, ready to make it official, and he didn't know how to tell me. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. This person I thought I knew, this person I trusted enough to uproot my entire life for, had been using me as some kind of emotional insurance policy while he waited for his real relationship to start back up. I wasn't his girlfriend. I was his backup plan, his rebound, the person he kept around just in case things didn't work out with the person he actually wanted. I moved out that night. I didn't have anywhere to go, so I crashed on my friend's couch for a few weeks while I figured out my next steps. Alex tried to apologize, sent me long texts about how sorry he was and how he never meant to hurt me. But the apologies felt hollow. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. There's a difference. The worst part came a few months later. I was scrolling through Instagram, trying to distract myself from everything, when I saw the post. Alex and Emma posing together in front of some scenic overlook, her hand extended toward the camera to show off a ring. The caption read something generic about finding your person and knowing when it's right. The comments were full of congratulations and heart emojis. I stared at that photo for longer than I should have, feeling this weird mix of anger and sadness and something close to relief, because at least now I knew for sure. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I was exactly what I thought I was, a stepping stone on someone else's path to happiness. I wasted a year of my life on someone who was auditioning me for a role I'd already lost before I even walked into the room. And the worst part is, I'll never get that time back. I'll never get back the version of myself that believed love could be that easy, that straightforward. Alex didn't just break my heart, he broke my ability to trust that kind of love in the first place. It's been a while now, and I'm doing better. I have my own place again, a small one-bedroom that's all mine. I'm not dating anyone, and honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to. But I'm working on it. Working on believing that not everyone is like Alex, that not every relationship is built on lies and hidden agendas. Some days are easier than that others, but I'm getting there. And speaking of boundaries being trampled, the next story shows what happens when you finally stand your ground and the people around you lose their minds over it. I've always been the dependable one in my family, the one who shows up when someone needs help moving, the one who drops everything when my sister needs a babysitter, the one who loans money without asking when it will come back. For years, I told myself that's just what family does. You help each other out. You don't keep score. You just show up. Except I was the only one showing up. It started small, like these things always do. My sister would call on a Friday afternoon asking if I could watch her kids for a few hours so she could run errands. Sure, no problem. Then a few hours turned into the whole evening because her errands somehow included dinner and drinks with friends. But I didn't say anything because, family. Then it was weekends. Then it was overnights. My calendar started filling up with their needs while my own plans got pushed aside, cancelled, forgotten. And it wasn't just babysitting. My brother needed help with his mortgage one month. My mom needed someone to house sit while she went on vacation. My dad needed a loan to fix his truck. Every single time, I said yes. Every single time, I rearranged my life to accommodate theirs. The money I loaned out never came back. The favors were never returned. But whenever I mentioned it, even casually, I'd get the same response. That's what family does. Don't be selfish. We're all we've got. So I kept saying yes, until I couldn't anymore. It was a Thursday when my sister texted asking if I could watch her kids that weekend. The fourth weekend in a row. I had plans this time. Actual plans I'd been looking forward to for weeks. A friend's birthday trip. Something for me, for once. So I did something I'd never done before. I said no. Just a simple, polite no. I already have plans this weekend. Sorry. You would have thought I'd committed a crime. The family group chat exploded within minutes. My sister said I was being selfish and that she'd always been there for me, which was news to me because I genuinely could not remember a single time she'd done me a favor without making it feel like I owed her my firstborn. My mum jumped in saying I was ungrateful for everything they'd done for me. My brother called me a bad aunt. The messages kept coming, one after another, each one more dramatic than the last. I was breaking apart the family, apparently, over one weekend. One single weekend where I chose myself instead of dropping everything for someone else's convenience. Then came the breaking point. My grandmother called me, crying, actually crying. She said she was so disappointed in me, that family is supposed to stick together, and how could I be so cruel to my sister, who works so hard and just needs a little help. I loved my grandmother. Hearing her cry because of me felt like a knife twisting in my chest. For a moment, I almost caved, almost texted my sister that I'd cancel my plans and watch the kids. But then something clicked. My grandmother lived 3 hours away. She barely used her phone. There was no way she just happened to call me out of nowhere about this. Someone put her up to it. They weaponized my grandmother's tears to guilt me into compliance. That's when I stopped feeling guilty and started feeling angry. I hung up, opened my phone, and started scrolling. Every text message, every request, every favor I'd done over the past 2 years. I took screenshots of all of it. The babysitting requests that turned into full weekends, the money I'd loaned that was never repaid, the last-minute emergencies that somehow always fell on my shoulders. I documented everything. 83 instances. 83 times I'd said yes when I should have said no. Over $3,000 in loans that were never paid back, never even acknowledged. I made a folder, I organized it by person, I added up the totals. But that wasn't even the worst part. While I was scrolling through old messages, I found a group chat I wasn't part of. My sister had accidentally included me months ago, then removed me, but the messages were still cached on my phone. I opened it and started reading. My stomach dropped. They were laughing about me. Actual laughing. My sister joked about how easy it was to get me to babysit, how I never said no, how I was like a free nanny service. My brother chimed in about how I was the family ATM, always good for a loan when he needed beer money. My mom said I was too nice for my own good, and they should take advantage of it while they could. Take advantage of it. Those were her exact words. I sat there staring at my phone, reading message after message, where my own family mocked me for being kind, for being available, for loving them enough to put their needs before my own. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a resource, something to be used up and discarded when convenient. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just took screenshots of that conversation too. Then I opened the family group chat, the one currently blowing up with messages about how selfish and terrible I was, and I posted everything, every screenshot, every receipt, every instance of me helping them while they laughed behind my back. I organized it neatly, chronologically, with a running total at the bottom. 2 years of free labor, $3,000 never repaid, 83 favors, 0 reciprocation. And at the very top, I posted the screenshots of them mocking me, calling me easy to manipulate, joking about taking advantage of my kindness. Then I typed one message. Here's what family actually looked like. And I muted the chat. For about 30 seconds, there was complete silence. Then my phone started vibrating non-stop, messages pouring in. But I didn't read them. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on my couch, and just breathed. The peace was immediate, like a weight I didn't know I was carrying suddenly lifted off my shoulders. Eventually, I unmuted the chat just to see the damage. My sister had left the group. My brother was trying to claim the screenshots were taken out of context, which is hilarious because there's really no good context, for we should take advantage of her while we can. My mom was sending paragraph after paragraph trying to justify everything, saying I was being dramatic, that families tease each other, that I was blowing things out of proportion. Then she called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. On the fourth call, I answered. She was crying now, begging me to delete the messages, saying I was embarrassing the family, that people would see and judge us. I almost laughed. She wasn't upset that they'd used me. She was upset that I'd exposed it. The problem wasn't their behavior. The problem was that I'd made it public. I told her no, I wasn't deleting anything. If they were embarrassed, maybe they shouldn't have done things worth being embarrassed about. Then I hung up. Half the family stopped speaking to me after that. My sister blocked me on everything. My brother sends passive-aggressive comments through relatives. My mum calls occasionally, trying to smooth things over, but she's never once apologized. She just wants me to rug sweep so things can go back to normal. But here's the thing, I don't want normal. Normal meant being a doormat. Normal meant sacrificing my own life to prop up theirs. Normal meant loving people who saw me as a convenience instead of a person. The other half of the family reached out privately. Cousins I barely talked to, an aunt who distanced herself years ago. Turns out I wasn't the only one they'd treated this way. I was just the first one to fight back. Some of them thanked me. Others shared their own stories of being used and discarded by the same people. It's been 6 months now. I went on that birthday trip. I've said no to 17 more requests since then. It gets easier every time. My bank account is healthier. My weekends are my own. I've started saying yes to things I actually want to do instead of things I'm obligated to do. Do I miss them? Sometimes. I miss the idea of what I thought we were, but I don't miss the reality of being used. I don't miss the anxiety of checking my phone and seeing another favor request. I don't miss arranging my entire life around people who wouldn't do the same for me. People ask if I regret exposing them. If I think I went too far? Honestly, no. They spent 2 years taking advantage of me and then had the audacity to call me selfish when I finally set a boundary. They earned that exposure, every screenshot, every receipt, every uncomfortable conversation they're now having with relatives who saw exactly who they really are. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish, enforcing them doesn't make you cruel, and exposing people who manipulate your kindness doesn't make you the villain. Sometimes the trash takes itself out. You just have to stop chasing after it. But what happens when the lying goes beyond manipulation and into full-blown deception? This next person discovered their partner wasn't just hiding something, they were hiding everything. Jordan and I had been together for 3 years, 3 full years of building what I thought was a real future. We had the kind of relationship that made other people jealous, you know? The Sunday morning pancakes, the inside jokes, the late night conversations about where we'd retire someday. We talked about marriage constantly. He'd show me rings. We'd discussed timelines. I genuinely believed I knew this man inside and out. So when Jordan told me he had to fly to Denver for a week-long work conference, I didn't think twice about it. He worked in sales, and these trips were normal. Annoying, sure, but normal. He texted me from the airport, sent me a photo of his hotel room when he checked in, called me every night before bed. Everything seemed perfectly routine. Then the conference got extended. Another week, he said. Some big client needed extra attention, couldn't be helped. He was really sorry. I told him it was fine. I missed him, but I understood. Work was work. That's when I got what I thought was a sweet idea. I'd send him a care package, his favorite snacks, a handwritten note, maybe one of those ridiculous travel pillows he always complained about needing. Something to remind him I was thinking about him. I called the hotel to arrange delivery. That's when everything started to crack. The front desk was polite but confused. They had no reservation under Jordan's name. Not for that week, not for the previous week, not at all. I thought maybe he'd booked under the company name, so I asked them to check that too. Nothing. No record of him whatsoever. My stomach dropped in a way I'd never felt before. It was this cold, hollow feeling that started in my chest and spread outward until my hands were shaking. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd switched hotels. Maybe there was a booking error. Maybe I'd written down the wrong hotel name. But deep down, I already knew something was very, very wrong. I pulled up our shared credit card account, the one we used for household expenses and bigger purchases. We'd always been transparent about money, or at least I thought we had. I scrolled through the recent charges, and that's when the bottom fell out of my world completely. Restaurants, a jewelry store, a florist, all local, all in our hometown. All charged during the exact days he was supposed to be in Denver. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, refreshing the page like maybe the charges would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. There was a charge from that Italian place downtown we'd been talking about trying, a significant purchase from a jewelry store I didn't recognize, and a florist charge from 3 days ago. The florist charge had an address attached in the transaction details. I don't even remember making the decision to get in my car. I just remember suddenly driving, my brain on autopilot, following GPS directions to a part of town I rarely visited. It was a nice neighborhood, tree-lined streets, well-maintained houses, the kind of place where people raised families. And there, parked in the driveway of a two-story colonial, was Jordan's car, his actual car, with the bumper sticker I'd gotten him as a joke still on the back window. I parked down the street, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I needed to see. I walked up to the house slowly, staying close to the hedges. The living room had large windows, with the curtains partially open, and through those windows I saw Jordan. He was sitting at a dining table, laughing, passing a bowl of something to a woman across from him, a woman I'd never seen before, and on either side of him were two kids, a boy and a girl, both elementary school age. They looked happy, comfortable, like a family that had existed long before I ever met Jordan. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, watching this scene play out. Jordan wiped the little boy's face with a napkin. The woman said something that made everyone laugh. It was so painfully, crushingly normal, and I was standing outside in the dark like a ghost, watching a life I didn't even know existed. This is where patience finally snapped. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos. Photos of the house, photos through the window, photos of Jordan's car in the driveway. Then I went back to my car and sat there, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, and I started digging. Social media, public records, anything I could find. It didn't take long. The woman's Facebook page was public. Her name was Amanda. She and Jordan had been married for 7 years. 7 years. There were photos of their wedding, vacation pictures, shots of the kids growing up. Jordan was in all of them, smiling that same smile I thought belonged to me. The timeline made me physically ill. Jordan and I started dating 3 years ago, which meant for our entire relationship, he'd been married. Those weekend work trips, time with his real family, those evenings he stayed late at the office, dinner with his wife and kids. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't even his mistress in any dramatic, intentional way. I was just his escape, his little side project, the person he pretended with when reality got too boring. You almost have to admire the audacity. I drove home in a daze. I didn't cry. I think I was too shocked for tears. I just felt hollow. When I got back to our apartment, the apartment we shared, the apartment where half the furniture was mine and my photos were on the walls, I looked around and realized it had all been a set, a stage Jordan performed on when he wanted a break from his real life. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I gathered evidence. I screenshot bank statements showing charges I now understood were for his family. I saved text messages where he claimed to be traveling when I now knew he was 10 minutes away with Amanda and the kids. I compiled 3 years of lies into a neat digital folder. Then I found Amanda on Facebook and sent her a message. I kept it simple. I told her who I was. I told her I'd been with Jordan for 3 years. I told her I had proof. And then I attached everything. Photos, bank statements, text messages, our lease agreement, everything that proved I wasn't some random person making things up. She responded within an hour. She didn't yell at me or blame me. She just said thank you for telling her. She'd suspected something was off but could never prove it. Now she had everything she needed. Then came the breaking point. Jordan came home the next day, all smiles, talking about how exhausting the Denver trip had been. I watched him lie to my face with the same ease he'd been doing for 3 years, and something in me just turned to ice. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just asked him how Denver was. He launched into some story about a difficult client. I listened to the whole thing. Then I asked if he wanted to see the photos I took. The confusion on his face would have been funny if everything wasn't so devastating. I pulled up the pictures on my phone, the house, his car, him through the window with Amanda and the kids. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. He tried to explain. God, did he try. It wasn't what it looked like. He could explain everything. Things with Amanda were complicated. He was going to tell me. He loved me. On, each excuse more pathetic than the last. I just stood there and let him talk himself in circles until he finally ran out of steam. Then I told him I'd already sent everything to Amanda. I told him she was filing for divorce and that her lawyer already had copies of all our financial records, including the ones showing him using marital funds to support a second household. I told him I'd already contacted our landlord about breaking the lease and that he had until the end of the week to get his things out. The panic that crossed his face was something I'll never forget. He realized in that moment that both his lives were ending simultaneously. Amanda was taking him to court. I was throwing him out. His carefully constructed double life was collapsing in on itself, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He tried bargaining, begging. He said he'd leave Amanda, that I was the one he really loved. When that didn't work, he got angry, started yelling about how I had no right to contact his wife, how I was ruining his family, like I was the homewrecker, like I'd known all along and chose to be part of this. I didn't engage, I just repeated that he had until Friday to get out. Then I went into the bedroom, locked the door, and finally let myself fall apart. The next few weeks were a blur. Jordan moved out. Amanda's divorce proceedings moved forward fast. Apparently, when you have a spouse using shared money to fund a secret second life, judges aren't particularly sympathetic. Last I heard through mutual friends, she took him for everything. The house, primary custody of the kids, a significant portion of his income. He tried reaching out to me a few times, mostly late-night texts about how sorry he was and how he'd made a terrible mistake. I blocked him after the third one. Me? I'm in therapy now, twice a week. I'm working through trust issues I didn't even know I had. I'm trying to figure out how to meet new people without assuming everyone is hiding a secret family. Some days are better than others. Some days I can laugh about the absurdity of it all. Other days I can't believe I shared a life with someone for 3 years and never saw the truth. But here's what I know now. I deserve better than being someone's escape plan. I deserve better than half-truths and strategic omissions. And I definitely deserve better than a man who could look me in the eye every single day and lie about the most fundamental parts of his existence. Jordan didn't just cheat. He built an entire alternate reality and cast me in it without my consent. And when it all came crashing down, he lost everything. Both families, both homes, any shred of integrity he might have had left. Sometimes justice doesn't need a plan, just patience. And if you think that betrayal was brutal, wait until you hear what happened when one man's accusations backfired in the most spectacular way possible. My boyfriend Dylan started acting strange about 6 months into our relationship. Not strange in a cute, quirky way. Strange in a way that made my skin crawl. He'd always been attentive, maybe a little clingy, but suddenly he became obsessive. He wanted to know where I was every second of the day. He'd text me constantly when I was at work, and if I didn't respond within minutes, he'd call. Then he'd call again, and again. At first, I thought maybe he was just insecure. We'd had a good thing going, and I figured he was worried about losing it. So I tried to be understanding. I'd reassure him, tell him where I was, send him photos of my lunch or my desk to prove I was actually at the office. But it was never enough. The more I gave, the more he demanded. Then he started asking for my passwords, my phone first. He said if I had nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem. I gave it to him because honestly, I didn't have anything to hide. And I thought maybe if he looked through my messages and saw how boring my life actually was, he'd calm down. He didn't. Instead, he started questioning every conversation. Why did my coworker use an exclamation point in that text? Why did I like that guy's Instagram post from 3 weeks ago? It was exhausting. The accusations started small, little comments about how I was dressing too nice for work, how I was probably trying to impress someone. Then they escalated. He'd accused me of flirting with the barista at our coffee shop, with my friend's boyfriend, with my cousin. It got to the point where I dreaded coming home because I knew he'd have some new theory about who I was secretly seeing. And here's where it gets absurd. One night, I came home from a completely normal day at work, and Dylan was waiting for me in the living room with this look on his face like he'd just solved a murder. He demanded my email login. Not asked, demanded. Said he knew I was hiding something and he needed to see my emails to prove it. I told him absolutely not. My email had work stuff, personal stuff, medical information, things that were none of his business even if we were dating. He lost it, started screaming about how I was obviously cheating, how only guilty people refused to hand over their passwords. how he knew I was lying to him. I just stood there watching him unravel, and something clicked. This wasn't normal jealousy. This wasn't insecurity. This was projection. He was accusing me of all these things with such specific detail, such conviction, that it felt like he was reading from a script he'd written himself. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I felt ridiculous doing it, like I was in some bad TV movie, but I needed to know if I was crazy or if my gut was right. I gave the investigator Dylan's information, his work schedule, his usual hangouts, and asked them to just see what he was up to. I expected maybe they'd find nothing, and I could write off Dylan's behavior as extreme anxiety, or something we could work through in therapy. What I got instead was a file 3 inches thick. Dylan had a girlfriend in the next town over. Her name was Rachel. She was a nurse. They'd been together for 18 months. 18 months, which meant he started dating her 6 months before he even met me. She thought she was his only girlfriend. He'd told her he traveled for work, which explained why he was gone certain nights. Those nights he was with me. The investigator had photos. Dylan and Rachel having dinner. Dylan and Rachel walking her dog. Dylan and Rachel kissing outside her apartment building. There were credit card receipts showing he'd bought her flowers, taken her to the same restaurants he'd taken me, even bought her jewelry from the same store where he'd gotten my birthday present. I sat in my car reading through everything, and I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. The investigator had also pulled Dylan's phone records. Turns out when he was screaming at me about not answering his texts fast enough, he was texting Rachel the exact same things, the same pet names, the same I miss you messages, even the same jokes. He'd been copy-pasting his relationship with me onto his relationship with her, or maybe it was the other way around. Either way, nothing about us was real. Nothing was unique. We were interchangeable parts in whatever sick game he was playing. I didn't know what to do with this information at first. Part of me wanted to just ghost him, block his number, and pretend the whole relationship never happened. But another part of me, the part that had spent months being accused of cheating while being completely faithful, wanted him to face what he'd done. So I reached out to Rachel, I found her on social media, and sent her a message. I kept it simple, told her who I was, that I'd been dating Dylan for a year, and that I had proof. I attached a few of the photos the investigator had taken, ones that clearly showed Dylan with me. Time-stamped and dated. I told her I wasn't angry at her, that she was as much a victim in this as I was, and that if she wanted to talk, I was available. She responded within an hour. She was in shock. She'd had no idea. Dylan had told her he was loyal, that he'd never cheat, that his ex-girlfriend had been unfaithful, and he'd never put someone through that pain. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. We started comparing notes, the same restaurants, the same weekend getaways to that bed and breakfast upstate, the same story about his childhood dog, the same excuses about having to work late. He'd been running the same playbook on both of us, probably counting on the fact that we lived just far enough apart to never accidentally run into each other. Rachel was furious, not at me, at him. She said she'd been feeling crazy for months because Dylan had started acting paranoid with her too, accusing her of cheating, demanding her passwords, tracking her location. He was doing the exact same thing to both of us. We decided we were done being gaslit. We coordinated a confrontation. Rachel had a key to Dylan's apartment. He'd given it to her months ago, told her to come and go as she pleased. We picked a Saturday when we knew he'd be home. We let ourselves in and sat down on his couch. Just sat there, waiting. When Dylan walked in carrying groceries, already pulling out his phone to probably text one of us some lie about where he was, he froze in the doorway. The look on his face was something I'll remember forever. Pure panic. His eyes went wide, his face went pale, and for a second I thought he might actually pass out. He dropped the grocery bags. An orange rolled across the floor and stopped at my feet. We didn't yell, we didn't scream. We'd planned this part carefully. Rachel and I had put together printed timelines, every date, every lie, every time he told me he was working late while he was actually with her, every time he told her he was visiting family while he was actually with me. We cross-referenced everything, highlighted the overlaps, made it impossible for him to talk his way out. We handed him the folders and stood up. He tried to say something, started stammering about how he could explain, how it wasn't what it looked like, but Rachel just held up her hand. She told him we weren't interested in explanations, we weren't interested in apologies, we just wanted him to know that we knew. That his whole carefully constructed double life was over, that we'd compared notes and he'd lost both of us. Then we walked out, together, left him standing in his apartment holding evidence of his own betrayal. Grocery bags spilled on the floor, that orange still sitting there like some kind of absurd punctuation mark on the worst day of his life. Dylan blew up both our phones for weeks after. Hundreds of texts, voicemails that went from apologetic to angry to desperate and back again. He tried every angle, told me Rachel had seduced him, told Rachel I had manipulated him, tried to claim he had a sex addiction and needed help, tried to say he loved us both and couldn't choose, each excuse more pathetic than the last. We blocked him, both of us, same day, and then Rachel and I went and got coffee. It's been 8 months now. Rachel and I aren't best friends or anything, but we check in on each other occasionally. We bonded over the shared experience of being manipulated by the same person, and there's something weirdly comforting about having someone who understands exactly what you went through. She's dating someone new now, someone who apparently doesn't have a secret second girlfriend. I'm taking a break from relationships entirely, working on trusting my instincts again. The thing about being accused of cheating when you're not is that it makes you question everything. Your judgment, your reality, whether you're somehow sending signals you don't mean to send. But Dylan's accusations were never about me. They were about him. He was so paranoid that I'd cheat because he was cheating. He demanded my passwords because he had something to hide. Every insecurity he projected onto me was just a reflection of his own guilt. Sometimes the trash really does take itself out. You just have to stop believing its lies first. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you team expose everything or team walk away quietly? Let me know, because this next story is about to make you pick a side. Now, where were we? Oh right, let's talk about what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, especially when it shows up right before your wedding day. 2 weeks before my wedding, I was living in that strange bubble where everything feels surreal and exciting and terrifying all at once. The venue was booked, the flowers were ordered. My dress was hanging in the closet waiting for the big day. Mark and I had been together for 2 years, and honestly, I thought I'd found my person. He was attentive, kind, made me laugh when I was stressed about wedding planning. Everything felt right. Then I picked up his phone to check the time because mine was charging in the other room, and I saw the notification. A text from someone saved as just the letter K. The preview showed enough to make my stomach clench. Miss you too. Can't stop thinking about our spot. Remember when we used to stay up all night just talking? I stood there holding his phone, staring at those words, trying to make them mean something innocent. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was his sister using a different phone. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But my hands were already shaking, and some part of me already knew. Mark was in the shower, so I did something I'd never done before. I opened his messages, I scrolled through the conversation with Kay, and with each message I read, my heart sank further. They were talking about memories, shared experiences, inside jokes that clearly went back years. Nothing was explicitly inappropriate, but the intimacy was unmistakable. These weren't messages you send to someone who's actually in your past. These were messages you send to someone who still holds a piece of you. When Mark got out of the shower, I was sitting on the bed with his phone in my lap. He saw my face and immediately knew something was wrong. I asked him who Kay was. He barely hesitated before saying it was just an old friend, someone from college, nothing to worry about. He said they'd reconnected on social media a few months back and sometimes chatted about old times. Completely harmless. I wanted to believe him. I really did. We were 2 weeks from getting married. I'd already addressed 200 wedding invitations. My parents had paid the final installment on the venue. Believing him would have been so much easier than facing whatever this actually was. So I told him okay. I said I understood, that I wasn't trying to be controlling, that I trusted him, and he smiled and kissed my forehead and told me he loved me and that there was nothing to worry about. But I couldn't shake it. That night, after Mark fell asleep, I pulled up our shared phone plan online. We'd combined our accounts 6 months earlier to save money, one of those practical relationship steps that feels so adult and permanent. I navigated to the call logs, not even sure what I was looking for. Maybe I just needed reassurance. Maybe I needed to prove to myself I was being paranoid. What I found instead was worse than anything I'd imagined. Pages and pages of calls to the same number. The number attached to K. Some lasting minutes, sure, but others going on for an hour, sometimes two. Multiple calls per week stretching back 4 months. Late night conversations while I was already asleep. Afternoon calls on days he said he was stuck in meetings. Morning calls before he left for work. 4 months of constant contact with someone he claimed was just an old friend he barely talked to. I felt sick, physically, genuinely sick. I grabbed my laptop and reverse searched the phone number. It took me to a Facebook profile, and there she was, Catherine. Not just some old college friend, his ex-wife. His ex-wife he'd told me he hadn't spoken to in over 3 years. His ex-wife he claimed was completely out of his life. His ex-wife whose name he'd shortened to a single letter in his phone so I wouldn't recognize it. And here's where it gets absurd. I looked at her recent posts. They were public, probably because she never bothered updating her privacy settings. Photos of places I recognized. The coffee shop near our apartment that Mark claimed to go to for work calls. The park where he said he'd been jogging to clear his head. And then I saw a post from 2 weeks ago, a quote about patience and timing, and how the right people find their way back to each other eventually. I screenshot everything, the call logs, the texts I could see, her Facebook profile. Then I sat there in the dark, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to wake Mark up right then and scream at him. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd never seen any of it and just get through the wedding. But a bigger part of me needed to know the truth, all of it. The next morning, I told Mark I was going to spend the day with my mom doing last-minute wedding errands. Instead, I drove to the address listed on Catherine's Facebook profile. It was a small house about 20 minutes away. Nothing fancy but well kept. Her car was in the driveway. I sat in my car for a solid 10 minutes, debating whether I was actually going to knock on a stranger's door and confront her about my fiancé. But she wasn't really a stranger, was she? She was someone who'd been part of Mark's life for months while I planned a future with him. I knocked. She answered. And the look on her face when she saw me told me everything I needed to know before either of us said a word. She recognized me, from photos probably. She knew exactly who I was. I asked if we could talk. She hesitated but let me in. We sat in her living room, this awkward tension hanging between us, and I just asked her straight out what was going on between her and Mark. She looked genuinely confused. Then she asked me why I was asking. Weren't we just waiting until after I got it out of my system? I'm sorry, what? That's when everything unraveled. Catherine thought Mark and I were essentially in a temporary relationship. She thought he was with me as some kind of transitional phase, getting certain things out of his system before coming back to her. She pulled out her phone and showed me texts I hadn't seen. Ones from a different app they'd apparently been using. Messages where Mark told her he still loved her. Messages where he said he was confused and needed time to figure things out. Messages from 3 days ago where he told her the wedding might be happening, but it didn't change how he felt about her. She genuinely believed they were getting back together after my wedding. She thought she was being patient and understanding, while Mark worked through whatever he needed to work through with me. I sat there listening to her talk about their plans, their future, how Mark had told her he just needed to handle some things first, and I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. This woman wasn't a villain. She wasn't trying to steal my fiancé. She thought I was the temporary one. She thought she was his actual future. I showed her the wedding invitations on my phone, the venue booking, the marriage license we'd already filed. She went pale. She had no idea the wedding was real. Mark had apparently told her it was something my family was pushing for, that he was going through the motions, but it didn't mean anything. We sat there for 2 hours, comparing notes, matching up timelines, realizing we'd both been fed completely different versions of reality by the same man. She cried. I didn't. I think I was too angry for tears. Before I left, I asked her to send me those texts. She did. I thanked her, which felt surreal, but honestly, she just saved me from marrying someone who was planning a completely different life behind my back. I drove home. Mark wasn't back yet. I pulled up our wedding group chat, the one with both our families in it. Everyone excitedly counting down the days, and I posted everything, the call logs, the texts from Catherine, screenshots of messages where Mark told her he loved her, while telling me he couldn't wait to marry me. I wrote one message above it all. The wedding is cancelled, this is why. Then I muted the chat and turned off my phone. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Mark's parents showed up at the apartment within an hour, begging me to reconsider, saying Mark made a mistake but he loved me, that we could work through it. My parents called them and apparently there was a screaming match I'm grateful I didn't witness. Friends started taking sides. The venue demanded to know if they should cancel or not. I packed Mark's things while he was still at work and left them by the door. When he came home, I was sitting on the couch with the ring box on the coffee table. He saw it and just stopped. He tried to explain, tried to say it wasn't what it looked like, that Catherine was confused, that he'd never planned to actually get back with her. I didn't let him finish. I told him I'd met her. I told him I knew everything. I slid the ring box across the table and told him to leave. He picked up the box, looked at me one more time like he was going to say something else, then walked out. I haven't seen him since. The wedding didn't happen, obviously. We lost some deposits. Some family members are still mad at me for how I handled it, saying I should have done it privately instead of exposing everything publicly. But honestly, I don't regret it. Mark had been lying to everyone, not just me. His parents thought they were gaining a daughter-in-law. My parents thought their daughter was marrying a good man. Everyone deserved to know the truth. It's been 8 months now. I'm doing okay. Better than okay, actually. I found out later that Catherine left him too once she realized the extent of his lies. Apparently playing two people against each other stops being fun when both of them wise up simultaneously. I'm not dating anyone. I'm not sure I'm ready, but I'm also not wasting my life on someone who saw me as a phase he needed to get through. I'm not planning a future with someone who was actively planning a different future with someone else. Mark tried to reach out a few months ago, some long email about how sorry he was and how he'd been in therapy and realized he'd sabotaged the best thing in his life. I deleted it without finishing. Whatever journey he's on, he can take it without me. The ring's been sold, the dress donated. And me, I'm exactly where I need to be. Single, sure, but at least I'm not marrying a liar. Sometimes the lies don't come from people close to you. They come from strangers who weaponize technology to destroy your life. And that's exactly what happened next. My boyfriend Marcus broke up with me on a Tuesday. Not over dinner, not in person, just a cold text that said we needed to talk, followed immediately by, "It's over." No explanation, no warning, just done. 3 years together, gone in 2 sentences. I called him immediately, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. He answered, but his voice was flat, distant, like I was a stranger. He said he'd seen proof that I was using him, that I'd told my friends I was only with him for his money, that everything between us had been a lie. I had no idea what he was talking about. I tried to explain, tried to ask what proof he meant, but he just kept saying he'd seen the messages, that there was no point denying it. Then he hung up. I sat there in complete shock. Messages? What messages? I racked my brain trying to figure out what he could possibly be referring to. I'd never said anything like that to anyone because it wasn't true. Marcus wasn't even wealthy. He had a decent job, sure, but we split everything fairly. I'd never asked him for money. The accusation made 0 sense. An hour later, my best friend Rachel sent me a screenshot. Someone had forwarded it to her asking if it was real. My stomach dropped when I opened it. It was a text conversation, supposedly between me and Rachel, where I was talking about Marcus, except the things I was saying were horrible, cold, calculating, stuff about how boring he was, how I was just waiting until I could get more out of him, how I was planning to string him along until someone better came along. None of it was real. I'd never sent those texts. Rachel confirmed immediately that we'd never had that conversation, but the screenshot looked legitimate. It had the right text bubble colors, the right contact name, even the right timestamps. Someone had put serious effort into making it look authentic. I tried sending the real conversation to Marcus, showing him that the screenshot was fake, that Rachel and I had never discussed anything like that. He didn't respond. I called, straight to voicemail. I drove to his apartment. He wouldn't answer the door. I sent emails, texts, voice messages, explaining that someone had fabricated the whole thing. Nothing. He'd made up his mind, and apparently my word meant nothing against a convincing fake. The breakup destroyed me, but after a few days of crying and feeling helpless, the grief started turning into something else. Anger. Someone had deliberately sabotaged my relationship. Someone had put in the time and effort to create a fake screenshot, convincing enough to end a 3-year relationship. And I was going to find out who. I started with the screenshot itself. I had Rachel send me the original file, and I dug into the metadata. Most people don't realize that image files contain hidden information, like when they were created, what software was used, sometimes even device identifiers. This screenshot had been created with an editing program, not actually captured from a phone. That confirmed it was fake, but I already knew that. What I needed was who made it. The metadata showed the file had been uploaded to Discord before being shared around. I created a burner account and started searching. I looked for servers related to Marcus, his hobbies, his friend groups, anything that might connect. It took days of dead ends before I found something. A private server, invitation only, with about 30 members. The server description mentioned relationship advice and venting, which seemed innocent enough. I spent 2 weeks lurking in that server, reading through months of chat history. Most of it was mundane, people complaining about their exes or asking for advice. But then I found a channel called Projects, and in that channel I found her. Her Discord name was different, but her profile picture was a poorly cropped photo I recognized from Instagram. Marcus's ex, Vanessa. She'd been active in the server for months, and when I searched her username, I found exactly what I needed. She'd posted about me, about us. She'd been tracking our relationship through social media, screenshotting our posts, commenting to her server friends about how pathetic it was that Marcus had moved on so quickly. There were dozens of messages escalating from bitter venting to active plotting, and then 3 weeks before the breakup, she posted a draft of the fake screenshot, asking if it looked realistic enough. The server members had helped her refine it, suggested changing the timestamps to make them more believable, advised her on which phrases would hurt most, cheered her on when she said she was ready to send it. One person even suggested she send it from a burner account to one of Marcus's friends instead of directly to him, so it would seem more credible. That's exactly what she'd done. But that wasn't even the worst part. She'd bragged about it after Marcus and I broke up, posted screenshots of his text to her where he'd reached out, clearly upset and vulnerable, and she'd played the supportive ex. She literally wrote, "Phase 1 complete," like our relationship ending was some kind of game she'd won. The server members congratulated her, called her a genius, asked for tips on how to do the same thing to their own enemies. I felt sick reading it. This wasn't just a moment of jealousy or a stupid impulse. This was calculated, methodical. She'd spent weeks planning how to destroy my relationship, and then she'd celebrated when it worked. I screenshot everything, every message she'd sent about me and Marcus, every piece of advice the server gave her, every timestamp showing she'd created the fake screenshot. I compiled it into a folder organized by date, with annotations explaining the context. Then I did more digging. Vanessa worked in marketing for a mid-sized company. I found this out through her LinkedIn, which she'd helpfully linked in her Discord bio. Her job involved social media management and digital content creation, which meant she had access to professional photo editing software. The same software that the metadata showed had been used to create the fake screenshot. I sent everything to Marcus first, the full Discord logs, the screenshots of Vanessa admitting what she'd done, the metadata from the fake image, a timeline of how she'd planned and executed the whole thing. I didn't add commentary. I didn't beg him to take me back. I just sent the evidence with a single message that said, "This is who actually lied to you." He responded 3 hours later. Just, "I'm so sorry. I tried calling him." Part of me wanted to hear him apologize properly, wanted him to grovel and admit how badly he'd messed up by not trusting me. But when I saw his name on my screen, I realized I didn't actually want to talk to him. The trust was gone. He'd thrown away 3 years based on a single screenshot without even giving me a real chance to defend myself. Sorry wasn't going to fix that. I didn't stop there, though. I sent the Discord logs to Vanessa's employer through their HR contact form. I explained that one of their employees had used company software to create fraudulent documents for personal harassment. I attached the metadata showing the editing software was registered to their company license. I wasn't sure if anything would come of it, but I figured it was worth trying. 2 weeks later, I got a LinkedIn message from someone who worked at Vanessa's company. They said they couldn't share details but wanted me to know that my report had been taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. They thanked me for bringing it to their attention. I found out through mutual friends what actually happened. The company had investigated and found that Vanessa had indeed used company software and resources to create the fake screenshot. She'd done it during work hours on a company computer. When confronted, she'd apparently tried to laugh it off as a personal matter that had nothing to do with her job. They disagreed. She was fired for misuse of company resources and for behavior that violated their ethics policy. Her Discord server had a meltdown when she posted about getting fired. Some people were sympathetic. Others pointed out that she'd literally documented her own harassment campaign and shouldn't be surprised there were consequences. The server got deleted about a week later. Marcus tried reaching out multiple times after that. He sent long apology texts about how he should have trusted me, how he'd let his insecurities get the better of him, how he wanted to make things right. He sent flowers to my apartment. He showed up at my work once, trying to talk to me in person. I told him I appreciated the apology, but we were done. Not because I was still angry, though I definitely was, but because I'd realized something important. The moment things got hard, the moment someone planted a seed of doubt, he'd abandon me without a second thought. 3 years of relationship meant less to him than a single screenshot from an unknown source. That wasn't love. That wasn't partnership. That was just convenience that evaporated the second it was tested. What Vanessa did was manipulative and cruel, but what Marcus did was worse in some ways. She was a bitter ex with obvious motivations. He was supposed to be my partner, and he chose to believe the worst of me without even a real conversation. I'm doing better now. It's been about 6 months. I'm not dating anyone, and honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to. The whole thing left me with trust issues I'm still working through. But I also learned something valuable about standing up for myself, about not accepting blame for things I didn't do, about fighting back when someone tries to destroy your life for their own entertainment. Vanessa lost her job, Marcus lost me, and I lost 3 years and a relationship I thought was real. Nobody really won, but at least the person who started it all faced actual consequences instead of just getting away with it. The screenshots, the Discord logs, all of it is still saved on my computer. I probably don't need them anymore, but I keep them anyway. A reminder that some people will go to shocking lengths to hurt you and that you have every right to defend yourself when they do. Fake screenshots are one thing, but the next story involves a betrayal so calculated, so public, that the fallout was absolutely nuclear. My girlfriend Jess and my best friend Mia hit it off immediately when I introduced them about 8 months into our relationship. I thought it was great at first. The two most important people in my life actually liked each other. No jealousy, no tension, just genuine friendship. I felt like I'd won some kind of relationship lottery. They started hanging out without me, which honestly seemed healthy. Jess would go to Mia's place for movie nights, or they'd grab brunch on Sundays. I encouraged it. I wanted them to have their own friendship separate from me. Looking back, that might have been the biggest mistake I made. The girls' nights became more frequent. Every weekend, sometimes twice a week. They'd post photos together, always laughing, always having the time of their lives. I'd joke about feeling left out, but it was just jokes. I trusted both of them completely. Why wouldn't I? Jess was my girlfriend of over a year. Mia had been my best friend since college. These were my people. Then the inside jokes started. They'd reference things I wasn't there for, laugh at comments I didn't understand, share looks that clearly meant something I wasn't privy to. When I'd ask what was funny, they'd wave it off with vague explanations that never quite made sense. It felt like being on the outside of something, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. Friends have inside jokes. That's normal. But then they changed their profile pictures to matching photos from some photo shoot they'd done together. Coordinated outfits, professional lighting, the works. I didn't even know they'd planned it. When I mentioned feeling a little weird about not being included, Jess got defensive. She said I was being paranoid and controlling, that she was allowed to have friends, that I was trying to isolate her. The accusation stung enough that I backed off completely. I started keeping my concerns to myself, even as the weird feeling in my gut grew stronger. They were constantly texting. Jess would smile at her phone, and when I'd ask who she was talking to, it was always Mia. They had more plans together than Jess and I did. On our anniversary, Jess cut dinner short because she promised to help Mia with something. I can't even remember what the excuse was now, and here's where it gets absurd. Mia came over to my apartment one Tuesday to borrow my tablet for a work presentation. She'd left her laptop at my place the weekend before and just hadn't picked it up yet. While she was there, her laptop chimed with a message notification. The screen was still open to her messages. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the preview was right there on the screen. It was from Jess. The message said something about confirming timeline and staying consistent. I should have closed the laptop. I should have minded my own business. But that feeling in my gut that I'd been ignoring for weeks suddenly screamed at me to look. So I did. I opened the message thread between Jess and Mia, and what I found made my blood run cold. They were planning to phase me out. Those were the actual words used. Phase me out. Like I was some kind of software update they needed to remove. The messages went back months, almost to the beginning of when they'd started getting close. They'd been orchestrating this entire thing. Jess was going to gradually become more distant, pick more fights, make me feel like the relationship was failing naturally. Then she'd break up with me, citing incompatibility or growing apart or whatever sounded believable. That's where Mia came in. She was supposed to be my shoulder to cry on, my supportive best friend who'd helped me through the heartbreak. She'd listen to me vent about the breakup, be there for me, let me process my feelings. Then, after a few months of playing the supportive friend, she was going to suddenly realize she had feelings for Jess. And what a coincidence, Jess would realize she had feelings for Mia too. They'd apologize profusely for the awkward situation, say they never meant for it to happen. But sometimes love just finds you when you least expect it. They thought it was foolproof. They actually used that word, foolproof. They'd mapped out the entire scheme in detail, including specific things Mia should say to me during the comforting phase to make sure I didn't suspect anything. There were backup plans for if I got suspicious too early, alternative timelines if I took the breakup too hard or not hard enough. It was methodical, calculated, sociopathic, honestly. I sat there reading through months of messages where they discussed me like I was a problem to be solved, rather than a person they supposedly cared about. They joked about how clueless I was. Mia made fun of how I'd encouraged their friendship. Jess laughed about me thinking I was being a supportive boyfriend. They were having entire conversations about our relationship, my feelings, my reactions, all while plotting to dismantle my life so they could be together. The betrayal from Jess was devastating, but the betrayal from Mia somehow hurt worse. She'd been my best friend for 6 years. 6 years of trust and history and shared experiences, and she'd been willing to throw all of that away, not even for love, but for a manipulative scheme that treated me like an obstacle instead of a human being. I screenshot everything, every single message, every detail of their plan, every joke at my expense, every casual cruelty. I saved it all to my phone. Then I closed the laptop and waited. Mia came back from the bathroom and grabbed her laptop, completely oblivious. She left my apartment still thinking her secret was safe. Jess texted me that evening asking if I wanted to come over. I said I was tired and stayed home. I needed time to think about how to handle this. I could have confronted them privately, could have had a mature conversation about boundaries and betrayal, but honestly, they didn't deserve that courtesy. They'd spent months meticulously planning to humiliate and manipulate me. They'd treated my feelings like a game to be won. So I decided to return the favor. We had a friend group chat with about 15 people, our core social circle, people we'd all known for years, people who considered both Jess and Mia friends. I opened the chat, uploaded every screenshot I'd taken, and posted them with a single caption. Since you two are so good at planning, here's your relationship timeline. Then I muted the chat and went to bed. The next morning, my phone had literally hundreds of notifications. The friend group had absolutely erupted. People were shocked, disgusted, angry. Half our friends had already blocked or removed Jess and Mia from social media. The other half were demanding explanations that neither Jess nor Mia could provide because I'd posted their own words. There was no talking their way out of it, no spinning it as a misunderstanding. It was all right there in black and white, their entire manipulative scheme laid bare for everyone to see. Jess called me 17 times. I didn't answer. Mia showed up at my apartment building. I didn't let her up. They both sent long, rambling text messages trying to explain or justify or apologize. I blocked them both without reading past the first few sentences. The fallout was immediate and brutal. People they'd known for years wanted nothing to do with them. Mutual friends had to pick sides, and almost everyone picked mine because, again, I had literal receipts of them being terrible people. Even people who wanted to stay neutral found it impossible once they read through the messages. Things went from bad to unhinged. Jess and Mia tried to salvage something from the wreckage by actually dating each other. I guess they figured since everyone already knew about their plan, they might as well go through with it. Maybe they thought it would prove the feelings were real, that it wasn't just about manipulation. Or maybe they were just too stubborn to admit their scheme had failed. It lasted 3 months, barely. Turns out a relationship built on betrayal and manipulation doesn't have a great foundation. Who knew? They fought constantly according to the few people who still had them on social media. The same calculating behavior they'd used on me, they started using on each other. Neither could trust the other because they'd both proven exactly who they were. You can't build intimacy with someone when you know they're capable of orchestrating that level of deception. When they broke up, it was messy and public, and everything their relationship with me wasn't allowed to be. Jess posted vague social media rants about toxicity and red flags. Mia apparently told people Jess had been emotionally manipulative, which, yeah, I could have told her that. They turned on each other with the same energy they'd used to plan my emotional destruction, and honestly, watching it implode was better than any revenge I could have planned myself. Neither of them has friends left from our old circle now. Last I heard, Jess moved to a different part of town. Mia got a new job in another city. Our mutual friends still talk about it sometimes, usually as a cautionary tale about karma, or a reminder to screenshot everything. Me? I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. It took a while to trust people again, I won't lie. The idea that two people I loved could spend months plotting against me did a number on my ability to take relationships at face value. But I'm working through it. I've made new friends who don't treat me like a chess piece to be moved around a board. And I've learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate or planned. Sometimes it's just telling the truth and letting people see exactly who they're dealing with. Jess and Mia thought they were so smart. Thought they'd mapped out every angle and accounted for every variable. But they forgot the most important rule of running a scheme. Don't leave evidence on an unlocked laptop in your co-conspirator's apartment. Betrayal from a partner is one thing, but when it comes from your own blood, that's a different kind of pain entirely. My sister Claire and I used to be close, not just siblings who tolerated each other at family dinners, but actual friends. We'd text each other stupid memes, grab lunch on weekends, vent about our lives over cheap wine and takeout. For most of our 20s, she was one of my favorite people. I trusted her with things I wouldn't tell anyone else. She knew my insecurities, my failures, my embarrassing moments, and I knew hers. Then she got a new job at some marketing firm downtown, and everything changed. She started hanging out with this new group of friends, the kind of people who dressed like they were auditioning for a lifestyle blog and talked about their personal brands like it was a real thing normal humans cared about. At first, I was happy for her. She seemed excited about her life, more confident, more social. But then I started noticing how she acted differently around them. The first time she introduced me to her new friends at a coffee shop, she sort of glossed over what I did for work. I'm a teacher, nothing glamorous, but nothing to be ashamed of either. But when one of her friends asked what I did, Claire jumped in before I could answer and said something vague about education, without actually saying I taught middle school. Like she was worried they'd judge her for having a sister with a normal job instead of some influencer career or startup position. It got worse from there. She stopped inviting me to things, and when I did show up to events, she'd make these little comments about my weight, about my clothes, about the fact that I was single after my engagement fell apart last year. Nothing overtly cruel, just enough to make me feel small in front of people I didn't even know. I tried talking to her about it once, asked if everything was okay between us, but she acted like I was being oversensitive. Said she was just joking around, that I needed to lighten up. Then came her birthday party. She threw this whole thing at some trendy bar downtown, invited all her new friends, and I showed up because despite everything, she was still my sister. I brought a gift, wore something nice, tried to blend in with her crowd even though I felt completely out of place. Everything was fine until about an hour in, when Claire had a few drinks and decided she wanted to entertain her audience. She started telling stories, funny ones at first, childhood stuff that made everyone laugh. Then she landed on my failed engagement. She told the whole room about how my ex had called it off 3 weeks before the wedding, how I'd already sent out invitations, how I'd cried so hard at Thanksgiving dinner that I threw up in my mum's kitchen sink. She acted it out, mimicking my crying, exaggerating the whole thing for maximum comedic effect. Her friends were dying laughing. I just sat there with this frozen smile on my face, holding my drink so tight I thought the glass might shatter. When she finished, she looked right at me and said something like, "At least we can laugh about it now, right?" Like she was doing me a favor by publicly humiliating me in front of strangers. I nodded, said something about being able to laugh at myself. Then I excused myself to the bathroom and spent 10 minutes trying not to cry. I left early, didn't say goodbye, just slipped out while she was busy taking photos for Instagram with her new best friends. I drove home feeling this mixture of anger and sadness that I couldn't quite shake. My sister, the person who was supposed to have my back, had thrown me under the bus to impress people she barely knew. And the worst part was, I knew she had plenty of her own secrets, plenty of things she'd told me in confidence that would be just as humiliating if I decided to share them. But that wasn't even the worst part. The following week, my parents invited both of us to dinner. They did this monthly family dinner thing where we'd all get together and catch up. Claire asked if she could bring a couple friends, said they were in town and she didn't want to ditch them. My mum said sure, the more the merrier. I almost cancelled, but something in me decided to show up anyway. Dinner started normal enough. Small talk, passing dishes, my dad telling the same stories he always told. Claire's friends were there, two women from her marketing firm, who I vaguely recognized from the birthday party. They were polite, but clearly more interested in talking to Claire than anyone else at the table. About halfway through the meal, one of them asked Claire about work, how the big corporate job was going, if she was still loving it. Claire launched into this whole thing about how amazing it was, how she was working on these huge campaigns, how the company culture was incredible. Her friends were nodding along, impressed. My parents were smiling, proud. And I just sat there remembering the conversation Claire and I had 3 months ago, the one where she'd sobbed on my couch about getting fired. She'd been let go for falsifying expense reports. Nothing huge, just padding her spending here and there, claiming personal purchases as business expenses. But it was enough to get her terminated. She'd begged me not to tell our parents because she was embarrassed, said she'd find something new quickly and they'd never have to know. I'd promised to keep her secret because that's what sisters do, except she'd spent the last few months lying to everyone. Telling our parents and her friends that work was great while actually working retail at a department store across town. She'd told people she was between opportunities, taking time to find the right fit, when really she was folding sweaters and working register to pay her rent. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the memory of her mocking my failed engagement to a room full of strangers. Maybe it was watching her lie so effortlessly while her friends hung on every word. Maybe I was just tired of being her punching bag. Whatever it was, I opened my mouth and the words just came out. I said something like, "Oh, Claire, you don't have to keep up the corporate job story here. These are friends, right? They'd understand about the expense report situation." Her face went completely white. One of her friends asked what I was talking about, so I explained casually, like it was no big deal, how Claire had been fired from her amazing corporate job for falsifying expenses, how she'd been working retail for the past 3 months while telling everyone she was just being selective about her next career move. The silence at that table was deafening. Claire's friends looked genuinely horrified. My parents looked confused, turning to Claire for confirmation, and Claire just stared at me with this expression of complete betrayal, like she couldn't believe I'd actually said it out loud. That's when everything unraveled. She started yelling, called me a vindictive bitch right there at the dinner table, asked how I could do this to her, how I could betray her trust like that, how I was purposely trying to humiliate her in front of her friends. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Instead, I just stood up, grabbed my purse, and told her that at least when I fail, I own it. Then I walked out. My phone blew up within minutes. Claire sent me paragraph after paragraph about what a terrible person I was, how I'd ruined her life, how she'd never forgive me. Her friends left the dinner immediately, apparently too uncomfortable to stay. My parents tried calling to mediate, asking what was going on, why I would say something like that. I explained everything. The birthday party, the months of little comments, the way she'd been treating me like an embarrassment while lying to everyone about her own life. My mom tried the whole both sides thing, saying we both said hurtful things and needed to apologize to each other. But I was done. I'd spent months being Claire's punching bag so she could look good in front of people who probably wouldn't even be in her life a year from now. I'd kept her secrets while she broadcasted mine for entertainment. The difference was I'd been honest about my failures. My broken engagement wasn't a secret. It was just painful. Claire had been actively lying to everyone while judging me for being authentic. It's been 2 months now and we haven't spoken. She blocked me on everything, unfriended me on social media, blocked my number, the whole dramatic exit. My parents still try to get us to reconcile, keep saying family is family and we need to work it out. But honestly, I don't miss her. I don't miss the constant low-level anxiety of wondering when she'd make another comment about my weight, or my job, or my dating life. I don't miss feeling like I had to be perfect around her to avoid becoming material for her next performance. Some people asked if I felt bad about exposing her like that, if maybe I went too far. And sure, it wasn't my finest moment, but she'd spent months making me feel small to make herself feel big. She'd weaponized my pain to impress strangers. At some point, you have to stop protecting people who use your vulnerabilities against you. Claire wanted to play games with secrets and humiliation. She just didn't expect me to know how to play back. Now, imagine your entire foundation being ripped away by someone who was supposed to protect you. That's what happened when one father decided to come clean on his deathbed. My dad was dying, and we all knew it. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer doesn't leave much room for hope. So when he asked all 4 of us kids to come to the hospital, we thought we knew what was coming. A final goodbye, some last words of wisdom, maybe an apology for being emotionally distant all those years. We cleared our schedules, drove in from different states, and gathered around his bed like we were assembling for some sacred family ritual. What we got instead was a confession that burned our entire lives to the ground. He started by saying he needed to tell us the truth before he died, that he couldn't go to his grave with this secret. My sister Rachel reached over and squeezed his hand, thinking he was about to get sentimental. My brother Mike had his phone out, ready to record what he assumed would be meaningful last words. I just stood there at the foot of the bed, watching our father struggle to breathe through the oxygen mask, wondering what could possibly be so important that he needed all of us there at once. Then he said it. He had another family, 2 other kids, a whole other life in a town 2 hours away. He'd been splitting his time between us for 30 years. The room went completely silent except for the beeping of the heart monitor. I remember thinking I must have misheard him, that the morphine was making him confused. But he kept talking, kept explaining, and with every word the reality became clearer and more horrifying. All those business trips he took twice a month, he was going to his other family. The conferences that always seemed to fall on birthdays or holidays, he was celebrating the same occasions with different kids. Every time he said he loved us, every time he tucked us in, or showed up to a school play, or helped with homework, he was doing the same things with 2 other children who thought they were his only family too. My younger sister started crying immediately. Mike just walked out of the room without saying a word. Rachel sat there frozen, still holding his hand like she couldn't process what she was hearing. I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my body, like this was happening to someone else and I was just observing. But that wasn't even the worst part. My dad, lying there dying, looked at us with what I can only describe as relief and said my mom had known for the last 10 years. She'd found out, confronted him, and decided to stay silent to keep the family together, to protect us from the truth. Every family dinner, every holiday, every moment where we thought we were a normal, intact family, my mom had been playing a role, pretending everything was fine while knowing her husband had an entire second life she'd agreed to ignore. I felt like the floor was tilting, like gravity had reversed and I was about to fall upward into nothing. My dad died 3 days later. We held his hand, we said our goodbyes, but it all felt hollow. How do you mourn someone you realize you never actually knew? The funeral was scheduled for the following week. We planned it with my mum, who barely spoke during the arrangements. She moved through everything like a ghost, nodding when the funeral director asked questions, signing papers without reading them. I tried to talk to her about what Dad had told us, but she just said there was nothing to discuss. It was over. He was gone. We needed to move forward. Then his other family showed up. We were at the funeral home an hour before the service, greeting early arrivals when they walked in. A woman about my mum's age with 2 people in their 20s, A guy and a girl. They walked right up to the casket like they belonged there. Because they did. They had just as much right to be there as we did, which was a thought that made me want to scream. My mum saw them and went pale. My siblings and I just stood there, staring, as this other woman, this other wife, because apparently my father was a bigamist on top of everything else, approached us with tears in her eyes and introduced herself. Her name was Linda. Her kids were Jason and Kira. They were devastated by their father's death and wanted to pay their respects. The irony of calling him their father in front of us, his other children, wasn't lost on anyone. People started noticing. Whispers spread through the funeral home like wildfire. Who were these people? Why did that woman call the deceased her husband? The service turned into a spectacle. Linda sat in the front row on one side. My mum sat in the front row on the other. Us kids were split between them like we were choosing teams. It was grotesque. It was humiliating. It was everything a funeral shouldn't be. Things went from bad to unhinged when the will was read a week later. My dad had been careful about some things and catastrophically careless about others. He'd kept his finances mostly separate, but there were shared assets. The house my mum lived in, partially owned by Linda too. Something about how the mortgage was structured. The life insurance policy we thought would help my mum, split 6 ways between all 6 of his children. Lawyers got involved immediately. Linda contested certain things, my mum contested others. It turned into this ugly legal battle where everything my dad owned got picked apart and divided. The estate was split 6 ways instead of the 4 we'd expected. My mum got less than half of what she thought she'd have for retirement. Linda wasn't much better off, and us kids, we got fractions of fractions, barely enough to cover the therapy bills we were all going to need. My mum didn't handle it well. 2 months after the funeral, she sold the house for whatever she could get, packed up 30 years of memories into a moving truck, and left for Florida without telling anyone. I found out from a neighbor who saw her leave. When I finally got her on the phone, she said she couldn't stay in that town anymore, couldn't face the neighbors who now knew her husband had been living a double life, couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when her entire marriage had been a performance. She doesn't call much anymore, maybe once every few months. The conversations are stilted and uncomfortable. She doesn't want to talk about dad or the past or anything that requires her to acknowledge what happened. She just wants to exist in her new life, her Florida retirement fantasy, where none of this ever occurred. My siblings and I don't talk much either. We tried for a while. We'd meet for coffee or dinner and attempt to process everything together. But every conversation just circled back to the same questions. How did we not know? What else did they lie about? Were any of our memories real? It was exhausting. We'd end up sitting in silence, staring at our drinks, drowning in shared trauma we didn't know how to navigate. Mike stopped responding to texts about 6 months ago. Rachel moved across the country for a job and uses the distance as an excuse not to visit. My youngest sister Emily sends occasional updates about her life, but we don't go deep. We can't. It hurts too much. I'm in therapy twice a week now. My therapist keeps asking me to talk about my childhood, to separate the real moments from the performance. But how do I do that? How do I know which memories are genuine and which ones were just my dad playing a role? When he taught me to ride a bike, was he present in that moment, or was he thinking about his other daughter and how he'd have to teach her too? When he told me he was proud of me at my college graduation, did he mean it, or was it just another line in the script he'd been reading from for 3 decades? I don't know who I am anymore. My entire sense of identity was built on this foundation of family, this idea that we were the 4 kids of this man who loved us, even if he wasn't always emotionally available. But that foundation was rotting the whole time. It was built on lies and betrayal, and a level of deception so profound I still can't fully wrap my head around it. The thing that keeps me up at night is thinking about my mum. She knew for 10 years of lying to us every single day. 10 years of watching my dad leave for his other family and smiling when he came back. 10 years of birthday parties and holidays and family photos where she knew it was all fake. She thought she was protecting us, keeping the family together, but all she did was rob us of the chance to process the truth while we still had time, while we still had the ability to confront our dad and demand answers. Now he's gone, and we're left with nothing but questions and fractured relationships and the knowledge that everything we believed about our family was a carefully maintained illusion. Linda's kids are probably going through the same thing. We're all victims of the same man's selfishness, but that doesn't make it easier. It just means there are more of us drowning in the same mess. I don't know if my family will ever recover from this. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust my own memories or believe people when they say they love me. All I know is that my dad's deathbed confession didn't give us closure. It gave us chaos, and we're all still trying to find our way out. And while some parents hide entire families, others manipulate their own children with lies so deep they shape your entire sense of self. Growing up, I heard the same story 1,000 times. My dad left when I was 3 years old, just walked out one day and never looked back. My mum would tell anyone who'd listen how she raised me alone, how she sacrificed everything, how she worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, while my deadbeat father lived his life somewhere without a care in the world. She wore her single motherhood like a badge of honor, and everyone in our family treated her like a saint because of it. I believed it. Why wouldn't I? She was my mum. She had no reason to lie about something like that. So I grew up angry at a father I couldn't remember, convinced he'd chosen to abandon his own kid. Every birthday without a card, every Father's Day watching other kids with their dads, every school event where I was the only one who came alone. It all reinforced the narrative that he just didn't care. My mom made sure I never forgot it either. Anytime I struggled with something, she'd mention how much easier it would be if I had a father who actually gave a damn. When I graduated high school, she cried about how my dad was missing these important moments by choice. When I got into college, she reminded me that she was doing this alone, that she was both parents, that I should be grateful for her sacrifice, and I was grateful. I put her on a pedestal. I defended her to anyone who suggested she was bitter or playing the victim. I was her loyal son, her proof that she'd done everything right despite being abandoned. That story held up for 28 years, and then my aunt contacted me on Facebook. I didn't even know I had an aunt on my dad's side. My mum had always said his family wanted nothing to do with us after he left, that they'd chosen him over me. But there she was, my dad's sister Jennifer, sending me a message that started with, "I know this is going to sound crazy, but please read this whole thing before you decide I'm insane." She told me my dad didn't abandon us. She said he'd been trying to reach me for 25 years. That my mom had taken out a restraining order against him when I was 3, claiming he'd been abusive, and that she'd used that order to keep him away from me completely. Jennifer said my dad had fought it, gone to court, tried everything legally possible to see me, but my mum had been convincing enough that the system sided with her. I almost deleted the message. It sounded like conspiracy theory nonsense from someone trying to rewrite history, but Jennifer said she had proof, court documents, emails, letters my dad had written to me that were returned unopened. She said she'd been looking for me for years, but my mum had moved us around enough that I was hard to track down. It was only when I'd made my Facebook profile more public a few months earlier that she'd finally found me. She offered to send me everything. Said I didn't have to believe her, didn't have to respond, but that I deserved to know the truth. So I gave her my email address, half expecting nothing to come through, half terrified of what might. The files came through within an hour. Dozens of documents, court records showing my dad fighting for custody, for visitation rights, for anything. A restraining order filed by my mom claiming my dad had hit her, threatened her, made her fear for her safety and mine. Testimony from my mom that painted my dad as violent and unstable. And then my dad's side, character witnesses saying he'd never shown any aggression. Medical records showing my mom had no documented injuries. A psychological evaluation that found no evidence of dangerous behavior. The court had sided with my mom anyway, granted the restraining order, denied my dad custody, gave him supervised visitation that my mum simply never showed up to, claiming she was too afraid. Eventually, his parental rights were so restricted, he could barely function as a father even on paper. But that wasn't even the worst part. Jennifer had sent me copies of letters, dozens of them. Letters my dad had written to me every year on my birthday, on Christmas, on random Tuesdays when he was thinking about me. They were all addressed to our old apartment, the one we'd lived in until I was 7. Every single one had been marked return to sender, but the postmark dates showed they'd been processed. Someone had received them and sent them back. There were bank statements too, child support payments. My dad had been paying child support for years, Money that was supposed to help raise me. The checks had all been cashed by my mom. Money she'd told me she never received. Money she'd said my dad refused to pay because he didn't care about his son. I sat at my computer reading through everything, my hands shaking, feeling like the floor was falling out from under me. Every story I'd been told, every piece of my history, all of it was a lie. My mum hadn't been abandoned. She'd done the abandoning. She'd weaponized the system, lied to courts, and systematically erased my father from my life. And she'd done it so thoroughly that I'd spent 28 years hating a man who'd been trying desperately to reach me. I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted it to be fake, wanted to find some explanation that would make my mom not the villain in this story. I drove to her house that evening without calling first. She was surprised to see me, happy even until she saw my face. I asked her point blank if my dad had ever tried to contact me. She said no, same story as always, same wounded expression she'd perfected over the years. So I pulled out my phone and started reading her one of the letters, dated from when I was 8 years old. My dad writing about how much he missed me, how he hoped I was doing well in school, how he was sorry he couldn't be there, but he was trying. Her face went white. She tried to grab my phone, started saying I didn't understand, that those letters didn't mean anything, that he was manipulating me even now. I asked her about the restraining order, about the abuse allegations, about the child support checks she'd cashed while telling me he paid nothing. That's when she started crying, the same tears she'd used my whole life to win arguments, to gain sympathy, to make herself the victim. She said she did what she thought was best, that my dad hadn't hit her, but he'd scared her, that she was protecting me, that I was too young to understand how complicated it was. I asked her what was complicated about cashing child support checks and lying about it. What was complicated about intercepting letters from my father? What was complicated about building my entire childhood on a lie that made her look like a martyr? She didn't have an answer for that, just kept crying and saying I didn't understand, that she'd sacrificed so much, that she was still my mother. Like that erased 28 years of calculated deception. I left without saying anything else, blocked her calls when she started blowing up my phone, and then I reached out to my dad. Jennifer connected us, gave him my number with my permission. He called me the same day, and I'll never forget the sound of his voice when I answered. He was crying, this grown man I'd never met, crying because his son was finally talking to him after 25 years of silence. We talked for 3 hours that first call. He told me his side of everything, how he'd loved my mum but the relationship had been toxic, how when they split he'd wanted shared custody, wanted to be present in my life, how my mum had filed the restraining order out of nowhere, claiming abuse that never happened, how he'd fought it but the courts believed her, how every attempt to reach me had been blocked. He'd never remarried, never had other kids. He said he couldn't move on when part of his heart was missing. He kept every returned letter, every denied court petition, every proof of child support payment, hoping that someday I'd want to know the truth. We started meeting for coffee, then lunch, then dinners. He showed me photos of myself as a toddler, pictures my mum had never shown me. He told me stories about teaching me to walk, about my first words, about the 1.5 years he'd been my dad before my mum cut him out. He was nothing like the monster she'd described. He was kind, patient, heartbroken over lost time, but grateful for the chance to build something now. Over the next few months, we built a relationship. It was weird and awkward and complicated, but it was real. I had a dad, an actual father who wanted to know me, who asked about my life, who showed up when he said he would. And the more time I spent with him, the angrier I got at my mom for stealing 25 years we could have had together. Thanksgiving was coming up. My mom had been texting me sporadically, trying to rug sweep the whole thing, acting like we could just move past it if I stopped being so dramatic. She sent me the usual invitation to Thanksgiving dinner at my grandparents' house, the big family gathering where she always held court, where everyone praised her strength and sacrifice. I decided to go, but I wasn't going to pretend anymore. Then came the breaking point. Dinner was the usual setup. 20-some family members crowded around tables, my mum in her element, telling stories, accepting compliments about what an amazing job she'd done raising me alone. My grandparents, her siblings, cousins, everyone who'd heard the story 1,000,000 times and believed every word. I waited until dessert was being served. Then I stood up and asked if I could say something. Everyone got quiet, probably expecting some heartfelt thank you to my mum for everything she'd done. Instead, I told them the truth. I told them about the restraining order based on false allegations, about the intercepted letters and cashed child support checks, about my dad spending 25 years trying to reach me while my mum played the abandoned single mother. I pulled out my phone and showed them some of the documents Jennifer had sent me: court records, bank statements, letters. The room went completely silent. My mum tried to interrupt, tried to cry, tried to say I was confused and manipulated. But I didn't let her talk over me this time. I just kept going, laying out every piece of evidence, every lie she'd told. Every year she'd kept me from my father while pretending to be a victim. My grandmother started crying, not sympathetic tears for my mum, but angry, betrayed tears. She asked my mum if it was true. My mum tried to defend herself, said it was more complicated than I was making it sound, that she'd done what she thought was right. My uncle, my mum's own brother, asked her point blank if she'd really taken child support money, while claiming my dad paid nothing. She couldn't answer, just sat there looking cornered and small and nothing like the strong, single mother she'd pretended to be. People started leaving. Some came up to me first, apologizing for believing her story, for never questioning it. Others just left without saying anything, too uncomfortable to face what they'd just learned. By the end of the night, it was just my mum, my grandparents, and me. My grandfather, who'd always treated my mum like she could do no wrong, looked at her with this expression of complete disappointment. He told her she needed to leave. She tried to protest, but he just repeated it. She needed to leave. That was 4 months ago. My mum's sainthood in the family is completely destroyed. People who used to praise her sacrifice now avoid her at family events. My grandparents still talk to her, but the relationship is strained. Her siblings are furious. Cousins who used to consider her an inspiration now see her as the person who lied for decades and kept a child from his father. She's tried to apologize to me a few times, sent long emails about how sorry she is, how she never meant for it to go this far, how she was young and scared and made mistakes. But you don't intercept letters for 25 years by mistake. You don't cash child support checks and lie about it by accident. You don't build an entire false narrative and maintain it for decades without knowing exactly what you're doing. My dad and I have dinner every week now. We're making up for lost time, even though we both know we can't actually get those years back. He's met my friends. I've met his side of the family. Jennifer has become like an actual aunt to me, not just some stranger on Facebook. The relationship with my mom is basically non-existent. Some people think I should forgive her, that she's still my mother, that family is complicated, but they didn't grow up hating half their DNA because of lies. They didn't spend their whole childhood feeling abandoned when the truth was so much worse. My mom made herself the center of a story where she was the victim and my dad was the villain. She controlled the narrative so well that everyone believed it without question. But stories built on lies don't last forever. Eventually, the truth finds its way out, and when it does, the person who lied gets exactly what they deserve. Family betrayal doesn't always come from parents. Sometimes it's the people you grew up with who stab you in the back for pure greed. When my grandmother died, she left behind a pretty decent estate. Nothing crazy, but enough that it mattered. A house, some savings, a few investments she'd built up over the years. She'd been clear about wanting everything split equally among her 5 grandkids, me, my brother, and our 3 cousins, including Natalie. She'd written it all out in her will, very specific, very fair. Everyone gets an equal share. Natalie was named executor. She was the oldest grandkid, had some experience with finances from her job, and my grandmother trusted her. At the time, it made sense. Natalie had always been responsible, organized, the kind of person who color-coded her calendar and never missed a deadline. None of us questioned it. The funeral came and went. We grieved, we shared memories, we supported each other the way families do. Natalie assured us she'd handle everything with the estate, said it might take a few months to sort through probate and get everything distributed, but she'd keep us updated. We thanked her for taking on the responsibility and went back to our lives. Months passed. Every time someone asked about the estate, Natalie had the same answer. Still tied up in probate. Lawyers are slow. Paperwork is complicated. These things take time. She sounded knowledgeable and confident, and none of us had any reason to doubt her. Probate is complicated. These things do take time. Then I started noticing her social media posts. Natalie had always been pretty active online, lots of photos and updates about her life. But suddenly the content changed. She was posting from tropical vacations, beach resorts that cost thousands of dollars a night. Then came photos of a brand new luxury car parked in front of what looked like a bigger apartment than the one she'd had before. Designer bags, expensive dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, a complete lifestyle upgrade seemingly overnight. When someone commented asking how she could afford all this, she said she'd gotten a big promotion at work. But I knew what she made. My cousin, her brother, had mentioned her salary once in passing. Even with a promotion, the math didn't add up. Not for this level of spending. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she'd been saving. Maybe she had other income I didn't know about. Maybe it was none of my business. But something felt wrong. That uncomfortable feeling you get when pieces don't quite fit together, but you can't articulate why. 6 more months went by. Still no distribution from the estate. Still the same excuses about probate and paperwork. Meanwhile, Natalie's lifestyle kept escalating. I finally decided to stop being polite and start asking real questions. I hired a lawyer, not to sue Natalie or anything aggressive, just to look into the estate and see what was actually happening with probate. My lawyer requested documentation, filed some paperwork with the court, and started digging into the actual status of my grandmother's estate. What he found made my blood run cold. The estate had been settled months ago. Most of the assets had been liquidated, converted to cash, and the money had been moved around through various accounts, but it hadn't been distributed to the 5 grandkids like the will specified. Instead, the trail led directly to accounts in Natalie's name. She'd been stealing from us, from her own family. She'd forged documents, created fake expense reports for estate management, and basically embezzled everything my grandmother had left behind. Over $200,000 gone into Natalie's personal accounts while she told us everything was stuck in legal limbo. My lawyer said we needed more evidence before going to the authorities. The paper trail was there, but having something more concrete would make the case airtight. That's when I came up with a plan that probably crossed some ethical lines, but at that point, I didn't care. My aunt, Natalie's mum, still had boxes of estate documents stored at her house. Natalie had convinced her it was easier to keep everything in one place while she worked through the paperwork. My aunt was traveling for 2 weeks, and I had a key to her house to water plants and check the mail. So I installed a nanny cam in the room where the documents were kept. Just a small camera hidden on a bookshelf, motion activated, streaming to my phone. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days after I installed the camera, I got a notification that motion had been detected. I opened the app and watched live as Natalie let herself into the house, went straight to the document boxes, and started going through paperwork. She was looking for something specific, scanning pages quickly. Then she found whatever it was, pulled out a portable shredder she'd brought with her, and started destroying documents. I recorded everything, watched her shred page after page of what I later confirmed were original estate documents, financial statements, anything that would have shown the real timeline of when assets were liquidated. She was systematically destroying evidence, probably realized that people were starting to ask questions and wanted to cover her tracks. When she finished, she took the shredded paper with her, probably to dispose of it somewhere else. She locked up the house and left, and I had the entire thing on video. But that wasn't even the worst part. I went through the footage more carefully later that night and noticed she'd also been photographing documents with her phone. I couldn't see exactly what they were, but the angle suggested bank statements or legal papers. She wasn't just destroying evidence, she was documenting whatever she hadn't stolen yet, still looking for ways to take more. The audacity was almost impressive in a sociopathic kind of way. I took everything to the police the next day. The financial records my lawyer had gathered, the video footage, a full timeline of Natalie's lies about probate. They opened an investigation immediately. Within a week, they'd frozen her accounts and brought her in for questioning. She tried denying everything at first, said I'd fabricated evidence, that I was just jealous of her success. Then they showed her the video of her shredding documents. She went quiet after that. The legal process took months to fully resolve, but the outcome was clear pretty quickly. Natalie was charged with fraud, forgery, and theft. She had to return over $200,000 to the estate, money she'd already spent on vacations and cars and her upgraded lifestyle. She had to sell stuff to pay it back. The new car, gone. Jewelry, sold. She's going to be paying off debt for years. She was also permanently banned from ever serving as an executor or in any fiduciary capacity again, and she's facing potential jail time depending on how the criminal case plays out. The family reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Complete chaos. Half the family thinks I destroyed Natalie's life over money, that I should have handled it privately, that going to the police was extreme. They act like I'm the villain for exposing what she did, instead of her being the villain for actually doing it. The other half, including my brother and one of our other cousins, are furious at Natalie and grateful I uncovered the truth. They'd been asking questions too, starting to suspect something was wrong, but not knowing how to prove it. Natalie's immediate family is the most conflicted. Her parents are devastated. They can't reconcile the daughter they raised with someone who'd steal from her own family. Her brother won't speak to her. The whole thing has fractured relationships that probably won't ever fully heal. People keep asking if I feel bad, if maybe I went too far. And honestly, no, not even a little bit. Natalie didn't make a mistake. She didn't accidentally mishandle the estate. She deliberately, methodically stole from 5 people, including her own siblings, and used our grief over our grandmother's death as cover. She shredded evidence, she forged documents. She looked me in the eye multiple times and lied about probate being complicated while she was literally on vacation spending our inheritance. The family members who think I ruined her life have it backwards. Natalie ruined her own life by being a thief. I just made sure she faced consequences for it. My grandmother worked hard for what she had. She was specific about wanting all her grandkids to benefit equally. Natalie decided she deserved it more than the rest of us and took it. That's not a family dispute. That's a crime, and I'd do the same thing again without hesitation. The estate is being properly distributed now, finally. What's left of it anyway, after legal fees and the mess of recovering everything? It's not about the money at this point. It's about the principle, about not letting someone get away with betraying every person who trusted them just because you share DNA. Natalie made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. Speaking of uncovering hidden truths, sometimes it's a simple DNA test that brings an entire family's secrets crashing down. I bought one of those Ancestry DNA tests during a Black Friday sale. $99 to find out my ethnic background, maybe connect with some distant cousins, see if I had any Viking ancestry or whatever. It seemed harmless, fun even. I spit in the tube, mailed it off, and forgot about it for 6 weeks while the lab did their thing. When the results came back, I logged in expecting pie charts and percentages. What I got instead was a message from a stranger in my DNA matches. It said, "I think we might be siblings. This has to be a mistake, right? But I'd really like to talk if you're open to it." My first thought was that the lab had screwed up, mixed up samples or something, but I clicked on the match details anyway, and that's when my stomach dropped. We shared 50% of our DNA. Not the distant cousin kind of match, not the maybe we had the same great-great-grandfather kind of thing. 50%, the kind of match that means you share a parent. I stared at my screen for a solid 10 minutes, refreshing the page like the numbers would change if I just waited long enough. They didn't. This person, username Ryan M1985, was genetically my half-sibling, which meant one of my parents had a whole other kid out there that they'd never mentioned. Not once, not in 30 years. I responded to Ryan's message, just a simple, "I saw the match too. I'm confused. Can you explain what you know?" He replied within an hour. We moved the conversation to email, and that's when he sent me everything. A birth certificate from 1985, listing my father's full name as the biological father. Adoption papers showing Ryan had been placed with a family when he was 3 days old. And letters. Actual handwritten letters from my dad to Ryan's biological mother, talking about the pregnancy, about how they couldn't keep the baby, about how this was the hardest decision he'd ever made. The letters were dated 2 years before my parents got married. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. My dad had a son. A whole entire son that he'd given up for adoption and then just never mentioned. Not to my mom, not to us kids. He'd buried it so deep that it took a recreational DNA test to dig it back up. I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd never seen it, delete the emails, block Ryan, and go back to my normal life where my family history made sense. But I couldn't. This was real. Ryan was real, and he deserved answers as much as I did. I confronted my parents on a Sunday, showed up at their house with printouts of everything Ryan had sent me. My dad's face went grey when he saw the birth certificate. My mum looked genuinely confused, which told me immediately that she had no idea. This wasn't some family secret they'd been keeping together. This was my dad's secret. Just his. He tried to explain. Said it happened when he was 22, before he'd met my mum, before he'd figured out his life. Ryan's mother was someone he'd dated briefly. When she got pregnant, they'd both agreed they weren't ready to be parents. They'd chosen adoption because they thought it was the best option for everyone involved. He'd signed away his parental rights, said goodbye, and tried to move on with his life. My mum asked why he'd never told her. 30 years of marriage, and he'd never once mentioned that he had a biological child out there. My dad said he didn't think it mattered. It was before they met. The adoption was closed. He never expected to hear from Ryan or have any contact. It was supposed to stay in the past, except it didn't stay in the past. It was sitting right there in my parents' living room in the form of DNA evidence and adoption paperwork, refusing to be ignored anymore. And here's where it gets absurd. My mom completely spiraled. She felt betrayed that my dad had hidden something so significant for their entire relationship. She started questioning everything else, wondering what other secrets he might be keeping. My siblings found out because my mum called them crying, and suddenly everyone was demanding answers and picking sides. Family group chats that used to be about weekend plans turned into battlegrounds about trust and honesty and whether my dad was even the person we thought he was. Then Ryan's adoptive family got involved. Ryan had told them about finding us, about the DNA match and the paperwork. They were supportive at first, happy he'd found his biological family. But then someone, I'm still not sure who, mentioned family heirlooms. My grandmother's jewelry that was supposed to be passed down. My grandfather's watch collection. Suddenly, Ryan's adoptive parents were sending emails about how Ryan had just as much right to family items as the rest of us did. How excluding him from inheritance discussions was discriminatory and possibly illegal. My siblings lost their minds. We'd grown up with these heirlooms, heard the stories behind them, been promised certain pieces for years, and now strangers were demanding we hand them over to someone we'd just met because of a DNA test. It felt insane. But legally, they might have had a point. Ryan was my dad's biological son, even if he'd been raised by someone else. That gave him some claim to family property, whether we liked it or not. Thanksgiving got cancelled that year. My mum said she couldn't sit at a table and pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. My siblings agreed. Ryan had actually been invited by my dad, which caused a whole other argument about whether he should be included in family events. Half of us thought it wasn't his fault and he deserved to know his biological family. The other half thought he was disrupting everything and should have just stayed in his own lane. Then came the breaking point. My parents separated. My mum moved into an apartment across town and filed for legal separation. Not divorce, not yet, but she said she needed space to figure out if she could still trust my dad. My dad was devastated. He'd thought the secret was protecting everyone, and instead it had blown up his marriage and fractured the entire family. My siblings barely talk to my dad now. They feel like they don't really know him anymore. If he could hide an entire child for 30 years, what else was he capable of hiding? The trust was just gone. Every memory from childhood suddenly felt suspect. Every time he'd been emotionally distant or preoccupied, we wondered if he was thinking about the son he'd given away. Ryan and I talk occasionally, awkward messages every few weeks about our lives, trying to build some kind of relationship without really knowing how. He's a decent guy. He didn't ask for any of this either. He just wanted to know where he came from, and instead he accidentally detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of someone else's family. His adoptive parents eventually backed off the heirloom demands after their lawyer told them it would be a nightmare to litigate. But the damage was done. My siblings see Ryan as the catalyst for everything falling apart, even though logically we all know it's my dad's secret that caused this, not Ryan's existence. I don't know if my parents will get back together. My mum says she's working through it in therapy, trying to separate the betrayal of the secret from the reality of what actually happened 40 years ago. My dad keeps saying he's sorry, that he never meant to hurt anyone, that he thought he was doing the right thing by keeping it buried. Maybe he even believed that. The Ancestry test is still sitting in my account. I can log in any time and see my ethnic breakdown, my genetic traits, my health predictions. But mostly what I see is that 50% DNA match and everything it cost us. One $99 test and our entire family structure collapsed like a house of cards. I've thought about deleting my account, just wiping it all and pretending I never took the test, but that wouldn't change anything. Ryan exists whether I acknowledge him or not. My dad's secret existed for decades before any of us knew about it. The DNA test didn't create the problem, it just forced us to finally deal with it. Sometimes I wonder if ignorance really would have been bliss, if we'd all have been happier never knowing, just continuing on with our simple family narrative, where everything made sense. But then I think about Ryan, who spent his whole life wondering where he came from, and I realized that narrative was never as simple as we thought. It just seemed that way because we didn't know the whole story. Now we do, and we're all trying to figure out what to do with that information. Some families survive revelations like this. They integrate the new information and find a way to move forward together. I don't know if we're going to be one of those families. Right now, it feels like we're all just floating in separate directions, held together by nothing but shared DNA and fractured memories of what we used to be. One DNA test, $99, 30 years of family history obliterated. Now let's shift gears from family drama to workplace nightmares, because the next story proves that coworkers can be just as ruthless. I worked at a small marketing firm downtown, one of those places where everyone knew each other's coffee orders and we'd do happy hours on Fridays. The kind of office where you felt like you had a work family, not just colleagues. We were a team of about 12 people, and for the most part, everyone got along. Or at least that's what I thought until the day my boss called me into her office with this look on her face that made my stomach drop. She closed the door behind me and sat down with her hands folded on the desk. There was someone from HR there too, which immediately told me this wasn't a casual check-in. My boss, Jennifer, got straight to it. $500 was missing from the petty cash box. Security footage allegedly showed me near the cash box during the window when the money disappeared, and my coworker Derek had reported seeing me acting suspicious around that area of the office. I just stared at her. I couldn't even form words at first because the accusation was so absurd. I'd never stolen anything in my life. I didn't even know where the petty cash box was kept half the time because I never needed to access it. Jennifer said they were taking this very seriously, that theft was grounds for immediate termination, but they wanted to give me a chance to explain before making any decisions. I told her the truth. I had no idea what she was talking about. I hadn't taken any money. I hadn't been near the cash box. There had to be some kind of mistake. But even as I said it, I could see the doubt in her eyes. The security footage showed someone who looked like me. Derek, who'd been with the company for 3 years and was generally well liked, had specifically reported suspicious behavior. It was my word against what looked like evidence. They suspended me pending investigation. Paid suspension at least, but the humiliation was immediate and overwhelming. I had to pack up my stuff while everyone watched, pretending not to stare but absolutely staring. I could feel their eyes on me as I grabbed my bag and left the office in the middle of the day, like some kind of criminal. The whole drive home I kept replaying the meeting in my head, trying to figure out what had just happened. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that security footage, about Derek's statement, about how confident Jennifer had seemed that they had the right person, but I knew I hadn't done it, which meant either the footage was wrong or someone was deliberately framing me, and the more I thought about it, the more the second option started to make horrible sense. Derek and I had always been friendly, but we'd been competing for the same promotion that was supposed to be announced next month. We both wanted the senior account manager position. It came with a significant raise and more autonomy. I'd been working my ass off to prove I deserved it, staying late, bringing in new clients, going above and beyond on every project. Derek had been doing the same, but if I was fired for theft, well, that would make his path to promotion pretty clear, wouldn't it? The next morning I started building my defense. I pulled up my phone's location data, something I'd never thought I'd need but was suddenly very grateful existed. The alleged theft happened on Tuesday between 2 and 3 p.m. According to my phone's GPS history, I'd been at a client meeting across town during that exact time window. I had the calendar invite, I had the email confirmation, I even had a receipt from the coffee shop near the client's office, time-stamped at 2:15. Then I looked at my credit card statements. I'd grabbed lunch that day at a restaurant 20 minutes from the office. The charge went through at 1:45 p.m. There was no physical way I could have been at that restaurant, driven back to the office, stolen the money, and then made it to my client meeting by 2:30. The timeline didn't work. I compiled everything into a document and sent it to HR. But I didn't stop there. Something about this whole situation felt off. If the security footage really showed me near the cash box, and I had proof I wasn't even in the building, then someone had to have messed with that footage. And the person who seemed most motivated to frame me was Derek. I started digging into the details of the petty cash system. We had a log where anyone who accessed the box had to sign their name and note what they were taking and why. I requested access to that log through HR, citing my need to build a complete defense. When I got it, I noticed something interesting. Derek had been the last person to handle the log before the theft was reported. He'd taken $40 for office supplies 2 days before the money went missing, which meant he'd had access to the cash box and would have known exactly how much was in there. But that wasn't even the worst part. I asked HR if I could review the full security footage, not just the clip they'd been shown. I explained that I had evidence placing me elsewhere during the theft and needed to understand what the cameras had actually captured. They were hesitant at first, but my location data was pretty damning. Evidence that something was wrong with their initial assessment. They agreed to pull the complete footage from that day. When we sat down to watch it together, me, Jennifer, and the HR rep, I immediately saw the problem. The timestamp on the clip they'd originally reviewed showed 2:15 p.m. But when we watched the full footage, you could see the timestamp jump. It went from 1:58 to 2:15 in a single frame. Someone had edited the video to remove a chunk of time and make it look like the remaining footage happened during a different window. We kept watching. At 1:59 p.m., the real timestamp before the edit, Derek walked up to the cash box. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, then opened it and took something out. The footage was grainy enough that you couldn't see exactly what he took, but you could see him pocket something and close the box. Then the timestamp skipped, and suddenly it was 2:15. The person in the edited footage that supposedly looked like me? It was from earlier that morning when I'd walked past that area to get to the break room. Derek had taken footage from a completely different time, edited out his own theft, and moved the timestamp to make it look like I was there when the money went missing. The HR rep actually gasped when we figured it out. Jennifer's face went from confusion to anger so fast, I thought she might actually throw something. They immediately called Derek into the office. I wasn't allowed to be in the room for that conversation, but I heard later that he'd tried to deny everything at first, said the footage must have glitched, that he didn't know anything about any edits, but they had the metadata from the video file showing exactly when it had been modified and from which computer. Derek's computer. He finally admitted it, broke down and confessed that he'd taken the money and framed me because he wanted the promotion. Thought if I was fired for theft, he'd be the obvious choice. He'd used some basic video editing software to manipulate the security footage, never thinking anyone would check the full recording or notice the timestamp discrepancy. Derek was fired immediately. Not just fired, but charged with theft and filing a false report. The company pressed charges because they took this kind of thing seriously, especially after almost ruining my career over his lies. I heard through the grapevine that he ended up pleading guilty to avoid jail time, got probation and community service, but the charge on his record made it impossible to get another job in marketing. Last I heard, he was working at a fast food place trying to pay off his legal fees. As for me, I got a formal apology from Jennifer and the company. They offered me the promotion Derek had been so desperate to get, along with a raise that was higher than originally planned, probably because they felt guilty about almost firing me for something I didn't do. They also implemented new security protocols and restricted access to the footage to prevent anyone from pulling something like that again. I accepted the promotion, but honestly, the whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth. I'd thought Derek was a friend, or at least a friendly colleague. We'd grabbed lunch together, we'd joked around in meetings, and the whole time he'd been willing to destroy my career and reputation for his own advancement. The level of calculation it took to plan that out, to edit footage, to lie to our boss's face and watch me get suspended, It was chilling. I still work at the firm, but I'm a lot more careful now about who I trust. I keep better records of everything. I back up my location data. I document conversations, not because I'm paranoid, but because I learned the hard way that some people will do absolutely anything to get ahead, even if it means burning someone else's life to the ground. Derek taught me that lesson. It cost him his career, but it cost me my ability to see coworkers as friends. The funny thing is, I probably would have gotten the promotion anyway. I'd been doing better work, bringing in bigger clients, getting better feedback, but Derek couldn't risk it. He had to guarantee his win, and in trying to cheat the system, he lost everything. You almost have to admire the audacity of thinking you could edit security footage and no one would notice. Almost. But what happens when it's not just a coworker, but your boss who's actively trying to ruin you? That's where this next story gets truly disturbing. My boss Greg was one of those guys who could light up a room when he walked in. Charismatic, well-connected, the kind of person who seemed to know everyone in our industry. When I first started working under him, I thought I'd hit the career jackpot. He had this reputation for mentoring rising talent, for being the guy who could open doors. People spoke about him like he was some kind of legend. Turns out legends aren't always what they're cracked up to be. The problem started about 3 months into my job. I'd been doing well, closing deals, getting positive feedback from clients, generally proving I deserved to be there. That's apparently when Greg decided I was a threat. It started small. He'd nitpick my emails, saying my tone was too casual or too formal, never quite right. He'd sit in on my presentations and afterward point out minor issues that nobody else had noticed or cared about. My attitude became a frequent topic of discussion in our one-on-ones, though he could never quite articulate what was wrong with it. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe he was just detail-oriented. Maybe he had high standards. Maybe I was being oversensitive. But then the sabotage began. I'd spend weeks working on a project, pouring hours into research and strategy, only to have my name quietly removed from the final presentation. Greg would present my work to clients as if it were his own, or he'd give credit to other team members who'd barely been involved. When I brought it up, he'd act confused, say it must have been an administrative error, promise to fix it next time. Next time never came. Then he started feeding clients false information about me. I'd get emails from people I'd been working with for months, suddenly questioning my competence, asking if I'd really made the mistakes Greg had mentioned to them, mistakes I'd never made. Errors that didn't exist. I'd have to spend hours doing damage control, proving that no, I hadn't missed that deadline, hadn't sent that incorrect data, hadn't dropped the ball on that deliverable. The worst part was how calculated it all was. Greg would exclude me from key meetings, then criticize me for not being up to speed on decisions that had been made without me. He'd assign me projects with impossible deadlines, then express disappointment when I couldn't deliver perfection in an unreasonable time frame. He was building a paper trail of my supposed incompetence, documenting every minor issue while ignoring anything I did well. I knew I was on the verge of being fired. I could feel it in every interaction, every meeting where Greg would sigh heavily at something I said, every email where he'd CC upper management on his concerns about my performance. The stress was eating me alive. I wasn't sleeping. I was constantly anxious. I'd worked so hard to get to this position, and now it was all crumbling because my boss had decided I was a threat to his ego. That's when I decided to fight back. I started documenting everything. Every email, every interaction, every meeting. I kept detailed notes with timestamps. I started recording our one-on-ones, which was legal in my state as long as one party consented, and I was that party. I saved every piece of work I did with my name on it before it could be altered. I created a paper trail of my own, one that showed the truth instead of Greg's carefully constructed narrative. But I didn't stop there. I started talking to other people in the office, carefully, quietly. Turns out I wasn't the first person Greg had targeted. There was a woman who'd left the company 6 months before I arrived, supposedly for performance issues. When I tracked her down through LinkedIn and bought her coffee, she told me a familiar story. Greg had done the same thing to her, stolen her work, sabotaged her reputation, pushed her out when she got too good at her job. There were others too, a guy in accounting who'd been demoted after clashing with Greg, a former assistant who'd quit rather than continue working under him. They all had stories, they all had documentation, and they were all willing to talk if it meant finally holding Greg accountable, And here's where it gets absurd. While I was building my case against Greg's treatment of employees, I stumbled across something else entirely. I was going through old expense reports, trying to find evidence of a business trip Greg claimed I'd mishandled, when I noticed something weird. There were invoices from vendors I'd never heard of, payments for services that didn't match any projects I knew about. The amounts weren't huge, nothing that would immediately raise red flags, but they were consistent, every month like clockwork. I started digging deeper, cross-referenced the vendor names with our actual suppliers, checked if these companies were even real. Some of them didn't exist at all. Others had addresses that led to empty lots or residential homes. Greg had been creating fake vendor invoices and approving payments to himself. He'd been embezzling company funds, probably for years, in amounts small enough to fly under the radar, but significant enough to add up to serious money. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. This wasn't just a toxic boss problem anymore. This was actual fraud, criminal activity, and I had proof. I spent 2 weeks compiling everything: the documentation of his treatment toward me and others, the testimony from former employees willing to go on record, the financial records showing the fake invoices and suspicious payments. I organized it all into a comprehensive report that was impossible to ignore. Then I requested a meeting with the board of directors. Greg found out I'd gone over his head and absolutely lost it. He called me into his office and screamed at me for 20 minutes about loyalty and chain of command and how I'd just destroyed my career. I recorded that conversation too. His threats were just more evidence for the pile. The board launched an investigation immediately. They brought in external auditors to go through the financials. They interviewed current and former employees. They reviewed every piece of documentation I provided. Greg was suspended pending the outcome, which meant I didn't have to see his face every day while waiting for the results. The investigation took 3 weeks. Greg was fired before the end of the first one. The evidence was overwhelming. The embezzlement alone was enough to terminate him immediately, but combined with the pattern of workplace harassment and retaliation, the board had no choice. They fired him, reported the financial fraud to the authorities, and revoked the professional credentials he'd spent his career building. Within days, everyone in our industry knew what had happened. The man who'd been so well connected, so respected, was now radioactive. Criminal charges followed. I don't know all the details because I wasn't directly involved in that part, but I heard through the grapevine that Greg was facing potential jail time. The amount he'd embezzled over the years had apparently grown to well over 6 figures once the forensic accountants finished their work. The board offered me Greg's position. At first, I wasn't sure I wanted it. The whole experience had left me exhausted and skeptical about corporate environments. But then I thought about all the people Greg had pushed out, all the careers he'd damaged, all the talent he'd wasted because of his own insecurity. Someone needed to do the job differently. Someone needed to prove that leadership didn't have to be built on sabotage and theft. I accepted the promotion. It's been 8 months now. I've completely restructured how our department operates, created actual transparency in project assignments, implemented a mentorship program that doesn't involve crushing anyone who shows promise. The team is stronger than it's ever been, and our numbers prove it. Turns out when you stop spending energy on office politics and actual crime, you can focus on doing good work. Greg is unemployed and basically blacklisted from the industry. Nobody wants to touch someone with his record. I heard he tried reaching out to some of his old contacts looking for opportunities, but the combination of the embezzlement charges and the stories from former employees made him untouchable. The network he'd spent decades building wanted nothing to do with him. People ask if I feel bad about it sometimes, if maybe I went too far. But here's the thing, I didn't destroy Greg's career. He did that himself. I just made sure the truth came out. He chose to steal from the company. He chose to sabotage employees who worked for him. He chose to build his success on lies and manipulation. All I did was document it and present it to people who had the power to do something about it. Karma might not always be instant, but it's definitely real. And sometimes it just needs a little help from a well-organized spreadsheet and a state where one-party consent recording is legal. And if you think one corrupt boss is bad, imagine an entire HR department covering up misconduct for years. That's exactly what this next person uncovered. I reported my manager for sexual harassment to HR on a Tuesday in March. I remember the date because I'd been building up the courage for weeks, documenting every inappropriate comment, every time he found an excuse to touch my shoulder or stand too close, every instance where he'd retaliate with impossible deadlines or public criticism after I'd rejected his advances. I walked into the HR office with a folder full of evidence, timestamps, witness names, everything they could possibly need to take action. The HR representative, a woman named Patricia, who'd worked there for 15 years, listened to my complaint with what I thought was genuine concern. She took notes, made sympathetic noises, assured me they took these matters very seriously. She said they'd launch an immediate investigation and that I should expect follow-up within a week. I left that office feeling lighter than I had in months. Finally, someone was going to do something. Finally, this nightmare would end. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. My manager continued showing up to work every day like nothing had changed. He still made comments about my appearance, still found reasons to corner me in empty conference rooms, still punished me professionally whenever I made it clear his attention wasn't welcome. I sent follow-up emails to Patricia asking about the investigation. She responded with vague corporate speak about processes taking time and needing to be thorough. Then, 2 months after my initial complaint, my manager got promoted. They announced it in a company-wide email. He was moving up to regional director, overseeing multiple offices, getting a significant raise and expanded authority. The email praised his leadership and dedication to the company. There was a celebration in the break room. People congratulated him, and I stood there holding my coffee, realizing that not only had HR done nothing about my complaint, but they'd actually rewarded the man I'd reported. I filed a formal complaint again. This time I went higher up the chain, copied executives, made it impossible to ignore. I outlined everything again, attached the original complaint, added new incidents that had occurred in the 2 months they'd spent doing absolutely nothing. I demanded action. I demanded accountability. Still nothing. That's when I remembered something about our company. We were a government contractor, which meant certain documents and records were subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. So I filed one. It took 3 months to process, but when the documents finally arrived, what I found made my blood run cold. Over 30 complaints, 30 separate cases of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation filed over the past 5 years. All of them buried, all of them closed without meaningful investigation. The pattern was consistent and damning. Employees would report misconduct by senior staff. HR would conduct a perfunctory investigation that somehow always concluded there was insufficient evidence or that the complaint was a misunderstanding. The accused would face no consequences. Sometimes they'd even get promoted shortly after, like the company was rewarding them for surviving the complaint. I found cases almost identical to mine. Women reporting sexual harassment from the same manager who'd harassed me. Complaints filed years before I even joined the company. Men reporting discrimination based on race or age. Employees detailing hostile work environments and retaliation. Every single one of them met with the same corporate stonewalling I was experiencing. The documents also revealed something else. Internal emails between HR and senior leadership discussing complaints as PR problems to be managed rather than serious issues requiring action. Conversations about protecting valuable employees, meaning the ones bringing in revenue, regardless of their behavior. Instructions to handle complaints quietly and avoid creating paper trails that could be used in lawsuits. They knew. They all knew. And they'd built an entire system designed to protect abusers and silence victims. I sat in my apartment reading through hundreds of pages of documents, feeling physically sick. These weren't just my experiences being invalidated. This was years of systematic corruption, of an institution prioritizing its reputation and bottom line over the safety and dignity of its employees. People had come forward, had been brave enough to report abuse, and the company had crushed them for it. And here's where it gets absurd. One of the emails I found was from Patricia, the HR rep who'd taken my initial complaint. She was discussing my case with the VP of Operations. She'd written that my complaint was credible and concerning, but that my manager was too important to the company to risk losing over what she called a she said, situation. She recommended closing the investigation without findings and monitoring to see if I'd drop it. The VP had responded with a thumbs up emoji. A thumbs up emoji. That's what my harassment was worth to them. I made copies of everything, organized it chronologically, redacted identifying information from other victims to protect their privacy. Then I reached out to a local journalist who'd written about workplace misconduct issues before. I sent everything anonymously through an encrypted email service, along with a detailed explanation of what the documents revealed. The journalist did her due diligence. She verified the documents, reached out to the company for comment, tracked down some of the other victims to see if they'd be willing to speak on record. A few were, others were too traumatized or too afraid of retaliation. But there was enough for a story, more than enough. The article published on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, it was trending on social media. By Thursday, other news outlets had picked it up. By Friday, federal investigators had announced they were looking into the company's practices. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The entire HR department was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Within 2 weeks, they were all fired, including Patricia and her thumbs-up emoji-loving VP. Several of the managers named in complaints, including mine, faced civil lawsuits from former employees who finally felt safe enough to come forward with legal action. But that wasn't even the worst part for the company. We were a government contractor. Our entire business model depended on maintaining contracts with federal agencies. Those agencies have conduct standards, requirements about how contractors treat their employees, handle complaints, maintain safe work environments. The revelations about years of buried harassment complaints violated pretty much all of those standards. 3 major contracts were terminated within a month. Others weren't renewed when they came up. The company that had seemed so untouchable, so powerful when I was sitting in Patricia's office, begging someone to take my complaint seriously, was suddenly hemorrhaging money and reputation. Their stock price tanked. Executives started jumping ship. Trade publications ran articles about the scandal. It became a case study in corporate malfeasance. I quit about 2 weeks after the story broke. Didn't give notice, just sent an email to my supervisor, not my promoted harasser, but the person who'd replaced him in my department, and said I was done. I already had another job lined up anyway. A competitor had reached out after seeing the news coverage, said they respected what I'd done and wanted to offer me a position with better pay and actual HR protections. I took it without hesitation. My former employer's reputation is in shambles now. They're still operational barely, but they lost over 60% of their workforce in the 6 months after the scandal broke. People didn't want to be associated with a company known for protecting sexual harassers and burying discrimination complaints. The few who stayed are probably just waiting for better opportunities. I don't feel guilty about any of it. People ask sometimes if I regret going public, if I feel bad about all the jobs lost when the contracts got terminated. But here's the thing, those jobs were lost because the company spent years building a culture of corruption and abuse, because leadership decided that protecting predators was more important than protecting employees, because HR turned complaint management into an art form of doing nothing while appearing to care. I didn't destroy that company. They destroyed themselves. I just made sure everyone could see what they'd been hiding. The journalists kept digging after the initial story. They found even more complaints that hadn't been included in my FOIA request. They interviewed dozens of former employees who shared stories of being harassed, discriminated against, and then gaslit by HR when they tried to report it. The scope of the misconduct was staggering. This wasn't a few bad actors. This was institutional rot that went all the way to the top. Some of the former employees thanked me, said they'd felt alone and crazy, like maybe they were overreacting or misremembering. Seeing their experiences validated in a national news story helped them heal. Others were angry that I'd gone public without consulting them, worried about their own privacy and reputations. I understand that. Trauma responses aren't uniform. Everyone has to process this stuff in their own way. I'm doing okay now. Better than okay, actually. My new job is everything the old one wasn't. HR actually responds to concerns. Management doesn't tolerate harassment. There's genuine accountability when people mess up. It's what a workplace should be, which is wild that it feels special instead of standard. I still have bad days, moments where I remember how powerless I felt sitting in Patricia's office, how betrayed I felt when I saw my harasser get promoted, how angry I still am that it took a media scandal for anyone to care. But mostly I'm just relieved it's over, that I don't have to see him anymore, that I work somewhere I'm valued as more than just a liability to be managed. The federal investigation is still ongoing. I've been interviewed twice as part of it. I don't know what the final outcome will be, but I know the company is facing significant fines and potentially criminal charges for fraud related to their government contracts. Turns out when you lie to federal agencies about your workplace practices, they take it personally. My former manager reached out once, about 3 months after everything exploded. He sent an email from a personal account saying he wanted to apologize, that he never meant to make me uncomfortable, that he hoped we could move past this. I deleted it without responding. There's no moving past years of harassment. There's no apology that makes it okay that he used his power to make my life hell because I wouldn't sleep with him. He can sit with his regret or not. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. And there you have it, 15 stories of betrayal, lies, and the sweet, sweet taste of justice served cold. If you've made it this far, you're officially part of the Chaos Crew. Look, life throws curveballs, and sometimes people will try to tear you down. But remember this, the truth always has a way of surfacing, and standing up for yourself is never the wrong move. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, keep your receipts, trust your gut, and never let anyone dim your light. I'll see you in the next one.